Chapter 658. It didn't take long for Dean to see a team of paladins standing by the river in front of the plane. The sun shined on their silver-gray armor and reflected the dazzling light. He saw a red-robed figure in front of the team of paladins. It was Cardinal Elnarin, who was next to Richelieu. Elder. Ernolin trotted in front of Dean and immediately jumped down from the horse's back. He bowed and saluted. He was one of the few people in the Holy Church who knew the real inside story. He didn't dare to treat Dean as a genius. "Let's go." Dean didn't ask anything. "Yes." Elnarin replied respectfully. He was surprised as he looked at Dean's appearance. It seemed that Dean knew the situation inside out. Lorenzo was sitting on a chair in the conference hall. Two knights were holding their swords to his throat. The other commander, Bryson, didn't have such good treatment. He was personally taken care of by Pulo. He was kneeling on the ground. His hair was messy, and there were many scars on his body. His armor was broken. He was captured by Pulo after the armistice. This was the first time he fought against the nominal number one person in the outer wall. The latter's strength was beyond his imagination. He didn't even have the chance to escape from the enemy. "It's useless even if you capture us." Lorenzo gritted his teeth and stared at Richelieu. "Commander Zidane will soon bring troops to encircle this place. She has 10 times more troops than you. Coupled with the steam rifle, it's enough to flatten this place. You won't be able to escape." Richelieu sat on a general's chair and said indifferently, "With you guys here, do you think you would dare to attack?" "Hey," Lorenzo sneered, "don't think that you can force them to retreat by using us as hostages. In the current situation, she will kill you along with us. That's the best result. The military and the Holy Church will see her as the king. Do you think she will be soft-hearted in the face of such a big temptation? Just wait to be buried with us." Richelieu slightly frowned as he looked at Pulo, who was next to him. Pulo thought for a moment. "Elder, why don't we retreat first and capture them at Mount Wutaw? With the help of the terrain there, we can certainly defend against them." Richelieu's eyes flashed as he hesitated. "What's the matter that's making you so distressed?" Suddenly, a clear voice came from outside. Everyone was startled and couldn't help but look outside. Cardinal Norin slowly walked into the hall with 3 figures. When they saw the face of the young man behind Norin, St. Lorenzo and the other generals and staff officers were stunned, their faces filled with astonishment. Richelieu was startled as he saw Dean come in person. He was relieved as his heart settled down. He got up and greeted, "Master, you have come." As soon as these words were spoken, the hall instantly fell silent. St. Lorenzo opened his mouth wide and stared at Richelieu in shock, wondering if he was hallucinating. "Young master?" And he even used honorifics to address you respectfully? Bryson, who was kneeling on the ground, and the rest of the defeated generals looked at this scene in disbelief. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. How could the leader of the Holy Church be so respectful to this genius in divine arts? Prow, who was pressing down on Bryson, was equally shocked as he looked at Richelieu in confusion. Dean patted Richelieu's shoulder. "You've worked hard. Are you hurt?" Richelieu was startled, but quickly responded, "No, it's just a small scratch." He put away the cut on the back of his hand. Dean's eyes were sharp. He looked at Ernolin. "The old pontiff is injured. Why didn't you bandage him?" Elnorin was shocked. "I'll call the priest." He saw that Dean didn't stop him, so he immediately turned and ran out. Dean took Richelieu's hand and came to the hall. He passed by Bryson, who was kneeling on the ground, and other generals. He didn't even glance at them. Dean helped Richelieu to sit down on the chair. He looked at Lorenzo, who was sitting on another chair. "Old commander, long time no see. How are you?" He waved his hand as he spoke. The 2 knights who were holding St. Lorenzo looked at Dean in confusion. They looked at Richelieu, who was next to him. Richelieu nodded to them. Both of them loosened their grip on their swords. One of them carefully reminded Dean, "Master, be careful." Lorenzo looked at Dean in a daze. Dean's attitude and Richelieu's performance made him unable to see the boy as a simple master. Moreover, it was a historical moment of life and death for the Holy Church and the military. How could a master come here and waste time? Dean pulled a chair from the side and sat next to St. Lorenzo. He saw that Elnorin had come with 2 priests. As soon as the priest arrived, He bowed and immediately checked Richelieu's wound to prevent infection. St. Lorenzo stared at Dean, who was sitting next to him. "Mr. Dean, we have a friendship in the past. Can you talk to the old pontiff and ask him to withdraw his troops? Otherwise, we will all die here when Commander Skydon attacks." Dean looked at him in surprise, then shook his head. "Old Commander, you are really confused. How can I help you? It was my idea to take over your military region." St. Lorenzo was stunned. "You have indeed treated me well when it comes to friendship." Dean slowly said, "You immediately blocked the news of me when I was arrested by the inner wall. The people would have forgotten about my existence if I had come out later. I didn't expect the friendship price to be so low. Not only did I not get any help from the military, but you stepped on my foot." St. Lorenzo's face turned ugly. "There is a misunderstanding. Listen to me. You don't need to explain." Dean waved his hand. "The war will be over when Commander Skydon comes. I can go back to work then." Bryson was kneeling on the ground. "Do you really want to perish together with us? Commander Skydon won't let you go." Dean glanced at him. "Kneeling people don't deserve to talk to me." Bryson's body trembled in anger. St. Lorenzo suppressed his anger. "Mr. Dean, why do we have to kill each other? You are also a member of the Holy Church. Don't you have any compassion?" "It's all used up," Dean said. "If you have any, then take the initiative to surrender. By the way, persuade Skydon to surrender. From now on, the military will be loyal to the Holy Church. Be loyal to me." Lorenzo was stunned. He couldn't help but look at Richelieu and Dean. "Loyal to you?" Bryson and other staff officers who were kneeling on the ground were shocked. They thought that Dean had instigated the Pope to attack them. If that was the case, then Dean's words were too presumptuous. "Are you stupid or are you looking down on me?" Dean indifferently said, "Is there any problem with being loyal to me?" He noticed that Richelieu had a matter-of-fact look on his face. Suddenly, he thought of the honorifics and the way Richelieu addressed Dean. An incredible conclusion came to his mind. Dean was the real power behind the Holy Church. He immediately thought that Dean had been taken to the inner wall before. It was possible that Dean had gotten something from the inner wall. Perhaps he had been appreciated by a certain force and had made a leap in his cultivation. Although the possibility was low, but it wasn't impossible. "What is your relationship with the Pope?" He looked at Dean in bewilderment. Dudian didn't pay attention to such a boring question. Chapter 659. So fast. Puluo was surprised. Bryson and the other generals' eyes lit up as they heard Dudian's words. They were finally saved, although St. Lorenzo had said that they would be killed along with Richelieu and the others. But they knew that St. Lorenzo was deliberately trying to intimidate the Holy Church. If St. Lorenzo really did so, then there was only one consequence. He would be obliterated by the military. "I'll stop the enemy." Puluo looked at Dudian and asked Richelieu for instructions. Richelieu didn't respond as he looked at Dudian. He was waiting for his decision. "It's finally here." Dudian's eyes lit up. "Pontiff, I'll leave everything here to you. I'll be right back." Richelieu was startled. "I'll go with you." "No need," Richelieu said as he saw Dudian walk out of the hall. "Puluo, give the token to Mr. Dean." Puluo couldn't help but ask, "Are you going to hand over the holy cavalry to him?" Dean interrupted Richelieu. "No need. There is no need to be so troublesome. There are enough casualties." He took Aisha out of the hall. Sergei was the only one following them. Sergei looked back at Richelieu and the other generals in the hall. "Master, where are we going?" "The enemy is coming. Of course we're going to kill them," Dudian replied without looking back. Sergei was dumbfounded. "Kill the enemy? Are we going to rely on the three of us?" "Of course not." Sergei was relieved after hearing Dudian's words. But the next sentence almost scared him. "I'll do it alone." Dean had come to the plain outside. He stood on a high slope and quietly looked ahead. He saw the army of knights and the surrendered army stationed in the front of the defensive line. There was a faint black line at the end of the plain outside the defensive line. Sergei looked ahead and saw the rolling black lines gradually become clear. There were countless black heads moving in the distance. Sergei swallowed his saliva as he felt his heart beating wildly. Even though he had the strength of a senior hunter, he still felt an unbearable pressure in the face of countless soldiers. Young master, are you kidding me? Sergei felt as if something was stuck in his throat. He was so nervous that his muscles tightened. Let's let the holy cavalry go. They should be able to resist. Cold weapon warfare is great. It produces a fierce general who can change the situation by himself. Dudian didn't pay attention to Sergei's words. He whispered to Hai Shah, "You wait for me here. I'll be back soon." Hai Shah was expressionless as she indifferently looked at the front. It seemed that she wasn't afraid of the incoming army. She didn't care about the danger that Dudian was about to face. Dudian turned to Sergei. "Take care of her. Don't let anyone get close to her." Sergei hurried to ask Dudian to stay. "Master, we have so many people. Why do you have to fight alone? It's dangerous." "Because of efficiency," Dudian said. Sergei was stunned. Dudian took off the black fur coat and handed it to Sergei. He pulled out the dark steel sword from his waist and jumped down the high slope. He rushed towards the black army outside the defensive line. Sergei was startled. Suddenly, he heard the sound of armor rubbing against each other. He turned around and saw Richelieu and Poulot escorting St. Lorenzo, Bryson, and other military officers. "Where is he?" Richelieu asked Sergei as he didn't see Dudian. Sergei wryly smiled. "Young master is going to fight." "Fight?" Richelieu was stunned. Poulot, who was next to Sergei, said, "He is a master of invention. Why is he going to fight? Is he tired of living? Why didn't you stop him? How many people did he lead to fight? How can he mobilize the holy cavalry without my permission?" Sergei glanced at him. Remembering his identity as the Great Light King, he held back the anger in his heart and didn't bother to respond to him. Poulot didn't think that a little attendant would dare to look at him. He was about to rebuke Sergei, but was stopped by Richelieu. Richelieu stood in front of the high slope and looked at the two camps of holy cavalry and surrendered army. He found that the two armies were motionless and there was no trace of chaos. The next moment, with his long-range vision, he suddenly saw a black figure charging out from the direction of the defense line. It leaped out of the defense line and ran toward the surging black tide on the other side of the plain. "What?" Richelieu was so shocked that his tongue almost trembled. "He is alone." Hearing this, Poulot, who was next to him, was instantly stunned. He raised his head and looked over. His gaze quickly saw an incomparably tiny black figure rapidly moving forward on the plains. He couldn't help but be dumbfounded. St. Lorenzo, Bryson, and the others who were being held at the back were stunned for a moment. They could not help but struggle to stand up and look forward. One of the old staff officers ignored them and sneered, "Fighting alone? What kind of joke is this? It's not called fighting, it's more like suicide. Does he think he's a god who could defeat the army brought by Commander Hidovan alone? Ridiculous." Just as he said this, a burly general beside him suddenly exclaimed, He went up alone." The old staff officer was stunned. "Isn't there the holy cavalry? Why is he going to fight alone?" Richelieu couldn't help but ask Sergei. In his impression, Dean had always been cautious and liked to hide in the dark to order others around. However, the current situation was one where even the brave generals didn't dare to take the lead in the battle. But Dean was the only one who was willing to go to the front. Sergei's face was bitter. Young master said that it's efficient. Efficient? Richelieu was stunned. Whoosh, whoosh. The deafening roar shook his eardrums, and his heartbeat accelerated uncontrollably. He clenched his sword, and his pupils changed. The black tide in front of him suddenly turned into a red scourge. The heat of countless figures glued together. In this red scourge, there were 7 or 8 figures emitting heat like fireballs. They should be the generals of the army. Dean's eyes turned and quickly found 3 figures that were more vigorous than the fireball. 2 of them were standing together, and the other one was on the left side of the army. He thought for a moment and locked his eyes on the 2 figures that were standing together. It was impossible to judge the specific position of the other heat sources in the crowd by using thermal vision alone. But Dean's vision wasn't thermal vision, but X-ray vision. He could easily lock the position of each heat source in the crowd. Charles noticed a person rushing out of the defensive line and immediately raised his hand to order the entire army to slow down. Soon, he saw the person's appearance clearly. He was wearing a strange black armor. It was not the military armor, nor was it the silver-gray armor of the Order's knights. He could not help but frown and shouted, "Who is it?" Dean narrowed his eyes as he looked at the army that was gradually coming to a halt. He didn't pay attention to the general's shouts. His feet suddenly exerted force as he used the dragon blood technique to control the flow of blood in his body. The power of magic marks surged out from his chest, and his whole body was covered with snow-white bones. He clenched his sword and rushed towards the general like a gray sword. Charles looked at Dean's sudden increase in speed and was shocked. He hurriedly shouted, "Get ready to meet the enemy. Heavy armor. Get into formation. Archers shoot." Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The archers released the arrows that had been prepared for a long time. Arrows rained down from the sky and fell on the plain in front of Dean. Dean didn't dodge, but rushed straight to the front. He waved the sword in his hand and quickly split the arrows that were falling from the sky. With his wide field of vision of 270 degrees, all the arrows that were aimed at his body were blocked one by one. Whoosh! After he broke away from the arrows, he leaped into the air and leaped over the heavy shields of the heavily armored soldiers. The height of his leap was so high that even the knights' spears that were piercing through the shields could not reach him. Charles was horrified. Even other generals couldn't do such a skill. He pulled out his sword and waved it forward. He roared, "Trap the beast formation. Kill!" Thousands of cavalry rushed out from the army behind him. The sound of hooves was like a torrent. They surrounded Dean in 3 layers and then tightened the encirclement to the center. Dean's eyes were indifferent. He didn't stop at all. He rushed forward and suddenly attacked. His palm grabbed the front leg of a knight's horse, and the other hand waved his sword to block the knight's spear. He roared fiercely, and the strong horse let out a mournful cry. Unexpectedly, it was pulled by Dean and danced. The knight on the back of the horse was tied by the rope, so he didn't fall. But it was difficult to attack when a horse was dancing. Get lost! Dean turned a few laps and suddenly smashed into the encirclement in front of him. Whoosh! The horse rushed out like a black cannonball. It instantly broke through 4 or 5 cavalry. The knight on the back of the horse vomited blood and died on the spot. Dean stepped on the body of the horse and rushed forward. He turned the sword in his hand and cut off the heads of 2 cavalrymen. He didn't stop but retreated back to the army to kill the general who had previously given the order. Damn! Stop him! Charles looked at the beast formation that was easily torn by Dean. He was so angry that his face changed color. There was some panic in his heart. He could feel that the murderous intent of the teenager was directed at him. Whoosh! Dean stepped on the head of the cavalry and rushed all the way forward. In the blink of an eye, he came in front of the general who was riding on the horse. Die! Charles was shocked and angry. He clenched his teeth and rushed forward. Dean's eyes were indifferent. His body suddenly sped up and his wrist shook. The moment the two crossed each other, blood sputtered and splashed on Dean's cheek. At the same time, a head flew up. Chapter 660. General Charles. 2 of Charles's trusted attendants saw this unbelievable scene. They roared in grief and indignation and rushed toward Dean with their guns. Dean didn't pay attention to them. He stepped on the shoulder of a knight and used the momentum to move towards the back of the knight. Kill! Kill! Stop him! The 3 generals in the rear saw Dean beheading Charles. They were incomparably shocked and angry. They didn't expect that there would be such a brave person in the enemy. Moreover, they didn't expect that this person would despise them so much. He dared to break into the enemy alone. It was simply unforgivable. Under the command of the 3 generals, the army quickly dispersed. Archers and musketeers retreated to both sides. Light cavalry and heavy armored soldiers outflanked from the side and took the initiative to attack Dean. In the case of close combat, archers and musketeers were useless. They would only hurt their own people. Dean was the only one who had broken through the army. Their newly established strongest regiment, the firearm regiment, was completely useless. Whoosh! Dean flew through the army. His feet did not touch the ground. He stepped on the shoulders of the knights along the way and swept forward. He was like a dragonfly skimming on the water, or like a butterfly. His movements were light and agile without the slightest bit of sloppiness. These knights raised their spears to stab Dean. With the impact of the cavalry, the destructive power of the spears increased to the strongest. But Dean's speed was too fast. He stepped on the heads of their horses or stepped on the spears. It seemed that he could borrow any physical substance. In the blink of an eye, he rushed hundreds of meters away without the slightest pause or the slightest injury. The three generals, senior colonels, and captains in the surroundings were all astonished to see this scene. What kind of aura and power was this? He was actually able to come and go as he pleased in the midst of an army of tens of thousands of men and horses, completely unscathed. Dudian looked straight ahead. There was a kind of disdain in his eyes. He was tired of everything in the world. Anyone who saw his eyes would tremble with fear, awe, and submission. He was holding a 3 feet long dark steel sword as he rushed forward. All the spears, sharp blades, swords were unable to hurt his snow-white bones. The ugly and ferocious skeleton-like appearance firmly wrapped his body and protected it tightly. In the center of the army, Sidon was wearing an exquisite bronze battle skirt, which accentuated her slender and plump figure. Coupled with her snow-white skin, she looked extremely dazzling and gorgeous. She was not only the only woman among the 3 commanders, but also the goddess in the hearts of all the officers and soldiers in the military region. Her dark brown eyes were like the eyes of an eagle, taking in the chaos that had suddenly arisen at the front lines. She also saw the pitch-black figure holding a sword and charging into the army. She frowned slightly, suddenly feeling that this person's face was somewhat familiar. It's him, Sidowin finally remembered. There was a trace of surprise on her face. Isn't this person an architect? How can he be so strong? Commander, do you recognize this person? A 5-star general next to her was surprised. His vision couldn't see the details of the turmoil in the front. He could only see the general situation. You know this person. He is the young master who gave us the legendary item for free. Sidowin stared at the turmoil. Her brows wrinkled more and more. Are you talking about the magic master called Do Something? The 5-star general couldn't help but be stunned. Judging from the turmoil in the front, the strength of the person wouldn't be lower than him. How could such an existence be the young architect? Sidowin stared at the battlefield. She was not in the mood to talk to him. She saw Dudian rushing all the way. His speed was extremely fast. The light cavalry and heavy guards couldn't stop him at all. She could clearly see that the person was coming towards her. Obviously, his purpose was to kill her. He came alone to kill her in the middle of thousands of troops. She felt scared and shocked as she thought about it. Was this the thinking of a normal person? What gave him so much courage? Why haven't you taken him down yet? Didn't you say that he was alone? A 5-star general said to a colonel knight next to the chariot, "Give me the telescope." The colonel knight immediately took out the telescope and handed it to the general. The 5-star general raised his eyes to look, and the blurry scene in front of him immediately became clear. He saw a young man dressed in black armor, holding a dark bronze longsword, stepping on the knight's shoulder as if he was walking on flat ground. Along the way, countless soldiers thrust their spears or brandished their swords in an attempt to stop him, but they were easily dodged. Occasionally, the swords that struck his feet were blocked by his metal boots, not causing him any damage. How is it possible? The 5-star general was stunned. He had thought that the newcomer had already been surrounded by the army and was struggling in pain. However, the situation was completely different from what he had imagined. Not only was the newcomer not surrounded by the army, he even treated the army like a field of grass that he could trample on as he pleased, using them as stepping stones. He put down the telescope and scolded the colonel knight next to him. "What the hell are you doing? How are you going to fight if the holy cavalry is behind him?" The colonel knight's mouth was bitter. He knew that the people in front couldn't take down the enemy. What could he do? Blame me? He naturally didn't dare to take the blame. Subordinates will immediately dispatch the Purple Feather Army to encircle the enemy. Go! The five-star general roared. The Colonel Cavalry General hurriedly accepted the order and rode out. Whoosh! Dudian flew all the way. Suddenly he saw that the army in front of the commander's chariot was divided into two sides. There were purple knights with fluttering purple feathers on their helmets. It was the famous Purple Feather Army of the military. It was the trump card of the military that had made the barbarians suffer countless hardships. It was also the trump card of the military that made the nobles fear them. Dudian narrowed his eyes, but didn't stop as he continued to rush forward. He could tell at a glance that the body heat of the Purple Feather Army was more than 5 times that of the ordinary soldiers. They were almost the same as the primary hunters, although the primary hunters were very weak compared to his current strength. But the army of thousands of primary hunters was no less than a scourge. It must be known that the 6 consortiums didn't have more than 2,000 primary hunters. This was the absolute strength of the military. Clatter! As soon as he got close to the Purple Feather Army, Dudian heard the jingling sound of chains. He saw the vanguard suddenly raise a black net to cover him in midair. Dudian quickly swung his sword. Whoosh! The dark steel sword stabbed the black net. The friction created fierce sparks, but it couldn't cut the black net. A net made of alloy? A cold light flashed in Dean's eyes, and he immediately abandoned his sword. When the black net covered his body and was about to close the net, he suddenly made a move. His hands grabbed a bull-size hole in the black net, and he angrily shouted, "Break for me!" Hiss! The soft but tough black net was instantly torn like a cloth, making a harsh and unpleasant sound. Dudian was like an angry beast freed from its cage. He took a step forward and the ground slightly trembled. He rushed out like an arrow and crashed into the Purple Feather Army. The Purple Feather Army reacted very quickly. Dozens of shields formed a giant shield in front of Dean as they saw him break through the net. Bang! Chapter 661. Dean rolled out of the mess. As soon as he looked up, he saw a shield smashing toward his head. He fiercely punched it. Bang! A violent collision sound rang out, and the burly armored soldier with the shield spat out a mouthful of blood. His body flew backwards, knocking over 2 knights. One of the knights' horse was hit in the head, and he died on the spot. The shield in the hands of the soldier was deeply caved in. It looked like a fist brand. The Purple Feather Cavalry were dumbfounded. What kind of monster is this? Dean's palm hit the ground, and he rushed forward like a cannonball. How is this possible? The 5-star admiral looked at this scene through the overlook mirror and was stunned. Zidowin stared at the unstoppable Dean. He turned to a young man who was leaning on the sofa. "We have met a tricky enemy. We may need you to take action." The young man was enjoying the snacks and fruits on the table. He smiled as he heard Zidowin's words. "Who is it? Look at how scared you are." Zidowin replied, "The person is very strong. He is far beyond the level of a hunter. He may not even be a primary limitless." Oh, when the young man heard this, he immediately became interested. He took a bite of the fruit that was worth more than gold and threw it out of the carriage. His figure flashed and appeared beside Zidowin. He raised his hand in front of his eyebrows, as if to block the sun. He looked forward and soon saw the chaotic area in front of him. He raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled. Interesting. No wonder he dares to attack the formation alone. He probably wants to capture you and end this war. Zidowin stared at him. "Are you sure?" "Sure?" The young man looked at her in surprise, as if he had heard something unbelievable. "You're asking me if I'm confident? Dear, are you insulting me?" No. The 5-star general knew that the young man was from the inner wall. He didn't dare to offend him. "Commander doesn't mean that. Why are you interrupting when the big shots are talking?" The young man glanced at him sideways. His gaze was as cold as ice, without the slightest emotion, and without the slightest playful attitude towards Hidovan. The 5-star general was taken aback, his entire body feeling a chill. He was so embarrassed that he didn't know how to reply, but he felt somewhat humiliated and annoyed. He was old enough to be this young man's father, yet he was actually called child. However, when he thought of the other party's identity, he could only admit it. Zidon's expression was indifferent as he said, "I know you're very strong, but the enemy isn't weak either. It's better for you not to underestimate them. Looks like you've underestimated me." There was a sad expression on the young man's face. "I'm from the inner wall. I don't know where this kid came from, but I can tell from his skills that he's just a primary limitless. Well, he's close to the level of a senior limitless. But I've killed a lot of senior limitless. My lord, you're truly formidable." The five-star general immediately complimented. The young man smiled at him. The five-star general immediately felt overwhelmed by the favor, and his face was full of smiles. Zidon looked at the battlefield in front of him and said, "Since that's the case, you should make your move as soon as possible so that my men don't die in vain. It's just a bunch of trash. It doesn't matter if a few of them die." The young man didn't care. He didn't intend to continue watching the battle. He twisted his neck and made a cracking sound. After doing a few warm-up exercises, he winked at Zidon with a hint of temptation. "Don't forget what we agreed on after this is done. I always keep my word." Zidon calmly replied. "Good." Whoosh! The young man's body flew out as soon as he finished his words. It seemed as if a hurricane was set off from where he stood. The chariot shook slightly. The five-star general looked at the young man who seemed to have teleported away, and his eyes were filled with shock. Although he rather detested this young man, he had to admit that other than having a higher status than him, the young man's strength was something he had never seen before. "So strong." The five-star general sighed. "I didn't expect that a random person from the inner wall would be so strong." "He didn't come here randomly," Zidon said indifferently. The five-star general looked at her. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. "What do you want to say?" Zidon seemed to notice the corner of the five-star general's mouth. The five-star general's heart shuddered slightly. He immediately found a topic and said, "What I want to say is, after he gets rid of this person, do we need to capture the entire church? Shouldn't we also capture the Holy Church in one fell swoop, since they have treated us like this?" "We'll talk about this when all three commanders are present," Zidon replied coldly. "Yes," the five-star general said respectfully and took the opportunity to flatter him. "Commander, you've saved St. Lorenzo, and Commander Bryson. You've saved the entire army. Such a great achievement. You must what?" Zidon suddenly cried out. The five-star general felt strange but could only repeat, "Commander, this rescue." He was halfway through his sentence when he heard a creaking sound. He saw that Zidon was holding the edge of the chariot with too much force and had crushed the guardrail. He was shocked and looked up at Zidon's face. He saw a beautiful face that was shocked to the extreme. Her expression was distorted because of the shock. He was stunned for a moment and suddenly reacted. He grabbed the telescope and looked in the direction of Zidon's gaze. He immediately saw the young man in black armor rushing straight towards the chaotic area in front of him. In the air beside him, a head rolled down. It was the young man who had rushed out earlier. The young man's face was no longer playful. Instead, it was full of horror. His eyes were wide open as if his eyeballs are going to fall out. "What?" he cried out in horror. He found that his reaction was the same as Commander Zidon's. Just one punch. Zidon's eyes widened. She wasn't ignorant about the power system of the inner wall. On the contrary, she was shocked because she knew about it. Although the previous fight was short, but she had been paying attention to it. She saw that Dean had killed the young man and broke his neck. What kind of terrifying strength was needed to break the neck with just a fist and cause the head to be sent flying? In her mind, only the legendary figures of the inner wall could kill the young man. But the scene in front of her was so real that she suspected it was fake. Whoosh! Dean swung his left arm to block the lance that was stabbing at him. He looked at the woman who was wearing Commander's clothes in front of him. He had to release his full strength when he fought against the master who had suddenly jumped out. Otherwise, he would be dragged into the enemy's army and would exhaust his physical strength. Now that he had exposed his true strength, he was too lazy to continue to hold back. Bang! Bang! Several cavalrymen were trampled by Dean's foot. Their shoulders made cracking sounds. Their legs softened and they knelt on the ground. Even the professionally trained horses couldn't bear the recoil force. Dean was like a black shadow as he passed through the army. He arrived in front of the gorgeous chariot in the middle of the army. Dean's speed gradually slowed down. He stepped on the shoulder of a cavalryman and leaped into the air. After flying for a few feet, he kicked the chest of the cavalryman who was protecting the chariot. The cavalryman flew back and rubbed the side of the chariot. He fell into the army behind the chariot. Dean was standing on the back of the horse. He looked down at Zidane with indifferent eyes, as if he was looking at an ant. Chapter 662. The chaotic battlefield seemed to have suddenly quietened down. Zidane stared blankly at the boy on horseback. The flying grass and the slow-moving soldiers seemed to be gradually moving away from her. She felt as if she was suddenly isolated from the world and sealed in a world of ice and snow without any temperature. The most dazzling thing in her sight was the eyes of the boy whose armor was stained with blood. They were like two deep black holes projected from the clouds. This brief illusion was broken by the long neigh of a strong horse. The cries of the surrounding soldiers were deafening once again. Dean jumped off the horse and gently landed on the edge of the chariot. This time he was closer to Zidane. Zidane's cheek was just in front of Dean's knee. It was less than an arm's length away from Dean. The five-star general standing next to Zidane was completely stunned. His body seemed to be strangled by some mysterious force, and he froze on the spot, unable to move. He could only hear the sound of his heart pounding wildly. He desperately wanted to move his feet back, but his feet seemed to be nailed to the ground and did not listen to him. "Do you want to be free from this, or surrender to me, like Saint Lorenzo?" Dean turned a blind eye to the spears and sword around him. He squatted down and quietly looked at the mature beauty. Bang! One of the spears stabbed at his face from the side. He gently raised his hand and grabbed the spearhead. His arm jerked, and the senior colonel who was sitting on the horse with the other end of the spear fell off the horse. Then he turned his palm, and the 4-meter-long spear made by the military rotated between his fingers. He swung like a huge windmill, blocking all the weapons from other directions. Although he exerted strength in his hand, his body didn't shake at all. It showed how skillful his control of strength was. All these years, whenever his left hand was not in use, he would use his left hand to train. Although his left hand was still numb, it was a world of difference compared to when he had just lost his senses. Moreover, due to the training of his numb left hand, he had a different understanding of his strength. His control over the fine details was not inferior to many experienced experts. The wind from the rotation of the spear blew the hair in front of Zidane's forehead. She felt a little difficult to breathe. It was as if the air around her had been plundered. The huge pressure was brought by the teenager who was squatting on the guardrail of the chariot. However, after all, she had been a commander for many years. She quickly calmed down and stared at Dean's deep eyes. She regained her momentum and said word by word, "Even if you kill me, you will die. They will still attack until all the Knights of the Order are killed." Dean waved his arm, and the spear suddenly pierced the throat of a major general who came to the rescue. He turned his palm slightly, and the tip of the spear twisted slightly in the throat of the major general. Then he pulled back, and the blood splashed on the chariot. He looked down at her without the slightest emotion, raised his other hand, and gently lifted her chin. "I didn't kill you directly because I don't want to waste my life. Don't think that you are really important. Even without you, Saint Lorenzo can still manage these people." Zidane felt that the palm on his chin was extremely cold. How was this a human palm? It was clearly a piece of bone-piercing ice. She slightly leaned back and broke away from Dean's palm. However, the coldness on her chin slowly penetrated into her heart. She knew that she was completely defeated. Dean was right. If she died, Dean could throw out the surrendered Saint Lorenzo and still manage these troops. At that time, her death would be an unnecessary sacrifice. Moreover, she also knew that the reason why Dean said these words to her was not because he cared about her sacrifice, but he was too lazy to bother. This was because she could clearly see the impatience in the youth's eyes. "Make your choice." Dean quietly stared at her. Zidane's mind was in chaos. She knew that she was no match for the boy from the previous fight. Her struggle was futile as the gap in strength was too big. I admit defeat. Zidane slightly bowed her head as she clenched her fingers. This was the first time she had suffered such a big humiliation. At the moment, she could only pin her hopes on the inner wall. As long as the military of the inner wall took action, there was hope to eliminate Dean. Let them rest in place. Dean immediately issued an order. Zidane took a deep breath and looked at the 5-star general. Pass the order. Rest in place. The 5-star general came back to his senses and wanted to speak, but then he thought that the commander had already surrendered. If he said anything more, wouldn't he be inviting a fatal disaster? He could only lower his head and agree. He shouted at the generals who were rushing over. All of you stop. Pass down the order. The entire army is to rest and reorganize where they are. The generals were stunned. They looked at Zidane and Dean, who was squatting on the guardrail of the chariot. One of the colonels couldn't help but ask, Commander, are you being coerced by him? We are coming to help you. The 5-star general's expression changed slightly, and he shouted angrily, What nonsense are you spouting? Are you trying to defy a military order? The colonel's face changed. He immediately shrank his head and didn't dare to make a sound. The other generals didn't dare to continue to speak. They turned around and left. Dean glanced at the 5-star general. I knew that the ability of the generals in the military was better than the civilians. I didn't think that the ability to surrender was the same as the civilians. It's not surprising that there are corrupt people in a corrupt system. It's a pity that they aren't as brave as a soldier. The general was embarrassed. He changed the topic. Mr. Dean, I've heard a lot about you. I didn't think that you would have such a good ability in addition to producing inventions. If I knew this, then I would have discussed with the Holy Church to let you come to our military. Aren't I here now? Dean waved his hand and signaled him to move to the side. He jumped onto the chariot. Since ancient times, the inheritance of power is bound to breed corruption. I know that aristocratic titles can be hereditary and positions in the Holy Church can be inherited. But it's the first time I know that the generals of the military can also inherit power. Fortunately, the Philin family has a talented general. The other families may not have such a strict family style. Zidane's face was gloomy. After all, the system had been passed down for more than 200 years. She didn't have the ability to change it even if she knew about it. She went straight to the topic. Do you work for the Holy Church? It's the opposite. Chapter 663. Call the generals over there to come with me to the headquarters. Don't let everyone wait for too long. Dean said to Zidane. She looked at the boy and suppressed the shock in her heart. She was silent for a little and let the 5-star general pass Dean's words. She knew that Dean wanted to take away the command of the army and cut off the joints of the army. Soon, the 6 generals galloped over with their personal guards to meet Cedar. You stay here to look after the army, Dean said to the 5-star general. The 5-star general was startled. Why me? Because you are afraid of death. I know you won't mess around, Dean said in a direct manner. The 5-star general was embarrassed, but he was able to get to the position he had today. This kind of insult was nothing to him. He bowed his head and suppressed the anger in his heart. Dean was relieved to see the 5-star general's appearance. He jumped from the chariot and sat on the back of a horse in front of him. He pulled the horse's rope and used his strength to suppress the struggling horse. He looked back at Zidane. The corner of Zidane's mouth twitched, but she didn't say anything. She called a horse and led the 6 generals to follow Dean and left the army. On the high slope, Richelieu, St. Lorenza, and the others watched as the army in front of them gradually calmed down. Because of the large number of people in the army, Dean was deep in the crowd. Even Richelieu's vision couldn't see where Dean's figure was. They were anxiously waiting for Dean's figure. Suddenly, they saw the army open up a path. Several cavalrymen rushed out of it. They were led by a black armored figure. Richelieu's eyes widened in shock. Although he knew that the army might not be able to kill Dean, it was still incredible to see him return safely. Soon, he saw the cavalry following behind Dean. All of them were wearing armors and epaulettes. One of them had a beautiful figure. Her long hair was fluttering under the helmet. She had a different kind of charm. She was one of the 3 commanders of the military region, Zidane. He really did it. Richelieu felt a trace of palpitation in his heart. St. Lorenzo, Bryson, and the other generals were stunned when they saw the faces of the cavalries. They didn't expect Dean to face thousands of troops alone and return safely. Moreover, he was followed by Commander Zidane. Is Zidane crazy? She actually left the army. Bryson couldn't help but shout in anger. Next to him, St. Lorenzo was relatively calm. The shock in his eyes slowly disappeared, and he said in a low voice, "She must have been forced to come out." Bryson turned to look at him and was stunned when he saw the gloomy expression on Bryson's face. He suddenly realized that the situation was hopeless, and the military was going to change hands from now on. He saw Aisha, who was standing motionless next to Sergei. She was standing in the same position as when he left. His heart was relieved. There was a trace of softness in his eyes, but it disappeared in an instant. He stopped in front of Richelieu and the others and dismounted. Zidane and the other 6 generals arrived one after another. "Are you here to celebrate my triumphant return?" Dean looked at St. Lorenzo and the others. St. Lorenzo, Bryson, and the other generals felt humiliated. They didn't have a mirror, but they could feel how ugly their faces were at the moment. They lowered their heads in shame and indignation. They used silence to resist the last bit of dignity. "Take them in," Dean said to Richelieu. "Yes, master," Richelieu replied. Ernie and the other knights who were standing behind Richelieu looked at Dean in shock. They felt that everything they had seen today was like a dream. It had completely subverted their imagination. "Commander Bryson, Commander St. Lorenzo." When the 6 generals behind Zidane saw St. Lorenzo and the others being subdued, they were shocked and angry. One of them pulled out his saber and glared at Richelieu and the others. Zidane knew that the situation was settled. He didn't want them to make unnecessary sacrifices. "Stop. We have lost." Lost. The 6 generals were stunned as they looked at her. One of the generals was impatient. "Commander, we have so many brothers behind us. We have tens of thousands of troops in our hands. Why should we surrender? Are we afraid of the Holy Church?" Zidane calmed down. "We are not afraid of the Holy Church, but Mr. Dean can kill us one by one in the army. You have seen the previous chaos. He rushed into the army unscathed and killed several generals. No one could stop him. I am far from being his opponent. He isn't someone who can be defeated by numbers. We have lost." The 6 generals were stunned. The biggest feature of the army is obedience to orders. The subordinates obey the superiors. It's like ants obeying the queen. Dean, who was standing next to Sergei, slowly said, "It's difficult to kill soldier ants one by one. But if you trample the queen, then the soldier ants will be scattered like sand. The biggest advantage is also the biggest disadvantage. Moreover, it's a disadvantage that can't be covered. Do you know?" "Yes, master." Sergei nodded, but his heart was boiling. He didn't expect that Dean would be able to capture the enemy's leader. He had only heard of such things in the bard stories. Dean looked at him and knew that he didn't listen to him. He didn't say anything more. He walked to the side and held Aisha's hand. The indifference on his face melted like ice and snow. He said softly, "Sorry to keep you waiting. Let's go." Aisha was silent. Dean took her hand and walked towards the military headquarters. Richelieu immediately retreated to the side. Elnarin and the rest of the knights who were standing behind him also retreated. At the same time, there was a remote grassland tens of thousands of meters away. There was a person's head under the grass. He was holding binoculars and looking at the distant high slope. Chapter 664. Dean was sitting in the highest position in the conference room of the military headquarters. His body was covered in black armor. The smell of blood made people feel heavy. Aisha and Sergei were standing next to him. Richelieu, Poulot, and the rest of the knights from the Holy Church were standing under the stairs. They were escorting the generals of the military, Bryson, and the 3 commanders of St. Lorenzo and Zidane. Poulot and the other knight captains had already figured something out. Although they found it hard to believe, they still silently digested this terrifying conjecture. After all, Richelieu, who they respected so much, had already shown a very clear attitude. At this time, they did not dare to say anything. St. Lorenzo had a complex mood as he looked at the aloof youth. He didn't expect that he would fall into such a situation one day. He didn't expect that the genius who specialized in the invention would have such terrifying strength. He had changed the situation of the outer wall for more than 200 years. The only person who could defeat him was the big shots of the inner wall. Richelieu. Dean called Richelieu's name. I'll leave the military to you. I hope to see a complete military headquarters before the end of the day. Richelieu was startled. He didn't expect that Dean would throw the military headquarters into his hands. Was that a trust? Or was it because he was fearless? Or was it to test his loyalty? He couldn't make up his mind. He could only follow Dean's words. I won't disappoint your expectations. Hearing his respectful words, the captains of the knights in the hall and the generals of the military felt an inexplicable throb. Not so long ago, when did they ever imagine that the high and mighty His Highness the Pope would have such a moment of humility? Several knights were secretly unhappy, but they remembered that Dean had broken into tens of thousands of troops to capture Zidowin. They didn't dare to express their dissatisfaction in their hearts. Commander Zidowin, the person I killed shouldn't be from the outer wall, right? Dean asked Zidowin. Zidowin calmly replied, yes. Dean nodded slightly. The strength that he used should be at the level of a high-level limitless. Unfortunately, he underestimated the enemy. He didn't reveal his magic marks before attacking me. How could he help you? Is this the trump card of your military? As soon as the words came out, Richelieu, Perrault, as well as the rest of the commanders were shocked. They didn't expect that there was such a fierce master hidden in the previous army. What was more terrifying was that such a person was killed by Dean. Moreover, he was killed with the help of tens of thousands of soldiers. She didn't intend to hide it. St. Lorenzo and Bryson also knew about it. He is from the Monster Research Institute of the Inner Wall. He has some deals with us. That's why he is willing to help. Deal? Dudeen narrowed his eyes. What deal? Richelieu and others looked at her in surprise. They didn't expect that the military would collude with the Monster Research Institute of the Inner Wall. Fortunately, they didn't have a fierce conflict with the military before. Zidowin replied, the Monster Research Institute of the Inner Wall has been committed to monster research. The monster illustrations of the hunters that the consortiums have cultivated are published by the Monster Research Institute. Even the Holy Church's blessing is from the Monster Research Institute. They need some special materials for some experiments, so they invited us to provide them to them. What about the rewards they gave you? Dean looked at her. Zidowin's face slightly changed. She wanted to skip this matter, but didn't expect to be singled out by Dean. She looked at St. Lorenzo and Bryson. Both of them were ashen and had no fighting spirit. She sighed in her heart as she knew that there was no need to hide it. In return, they will provide us with some force and God's marrow. Your superior in the inner wall is the military of the inner wall. Do you need them to provide protection? Dudeen said in a cold tone. Zidowin hesitated. Force protection is secondary. The main thing is God's marrow. No wonder your physique has surpassed the level of a hunter. Dean indifferently said. Hearing this, Richelieu and Perrault could not help but look at the female commander in surprise. Zidowin smiled. I have made a breakthrough in recent days. What are the special materials you are providing? Monster materials? If this is the case, then they should cooperate with the Holy Church. The hunters have handed over a lot of monster materials to the Holy Church. Dean asked with interest. Zidowin's face turned ugly. There's nothing special about them. They're just some rare monster corpses. St. Lorenzo interrupted. Dean glanced at him. What are you trying to cover up? St. Lorenzo's face slightly changed as he sighed in his heart. He knew that he couldn't hide it from Dean. He looked at Zidowin and signaled her not to say anything. Zidowin understood what he meant and lowered his head in silence. A captive should act like a captive. Don't tell me you want to suffer a bit. Dean's face was cold. Zidowin slowly loosened her fingers. She looked at Dean and was about to open her mouth. St. Lorenzo hurriedly said, You can't say it, or our military will be destroyed. Zidowin looked at him and then at Dean. She was silent for a long time before whispering, There is nothing that can't be said. These special materials are human bodies. Richelieu's eyes lit up. He wasn't too surprised. Human body experiments were common in the Dark Church. Pierrot and the other commanders were stunned. They didn't expect that the dignified military would secretly trade human bodies to the Monster Research Institute in the Inner Wall. It had always been illegal to use human bodies for research. They despised it. What was the difference between them and the dark believers who were wanted by them? But such a heartless thing was done by the military who had been guarding the outer wall. Dean frowned. Boring. He thought that it was some mysterious thing that he didn't know about. He didn't think that it was a dark transaction against humanity. No wonder the Monster Research Institute would look for the military and not the Holy Church. The military was indeed more suitable than the Holy Church for transporting human bodies. Is it a living human body? Dean asked. Zidowin bowed her head in silence. Dean's heart suddenly moved. He looked at Aisha, who was next to him, and his eyes flashed a trace of light. The Monster Institute was likely to have a solution to the undead infection if the human body was used for experiments. He felt more and more anxious as he thought of this. He stood up and looked at Richelieu. I'll leave this place to you. I'll go back first. Deal with it as soon as possible and behead anyone who disobeys. Yes, Richelieu respectfully replied. Chapter 665. The monastery in the inner wall was made of white jade bricks. It was full of pure and holy atmosphere. There were 7 or 8 figures sitting in one of the steeple halls. There were dozens of nurses standing next to them. Although the nurses here had the same name as those in the hospital, but they were 2 completely different concepts. They were equivalent to knights. Moglen, is there something urgent that you called us for? A burly old man wearing a black and gold robe asked. Moglen, who was sitting next to the dean, stood up. Dean, there's been a small change in the outer wall that I am in charge of. I need to report it to you. Since it is just a small change, then why do you need to report it? A short and thin old man said in a mocking tone. M.O. Glang glanced at him. There was a trace of killing intent in his heart, but he still had a smile on his face. Although it is a small change, but there have been a person in the outer wall recently. It is worth paying attention to. Moglen, just say it. The abbot simply said. He likes to keep us guessing. The short and thin old man laughed. M.O. Glam looked at him and turned to look at Dean. It's a long story. Half a year ago, there was a period of rapid changes in the outer wall. A talented youth appeared out of nowhere. He invented a number of inventions. Moreover, he created a 10th invention system out of the original 9 basic systems. It was called Chi System. This invention is similar to the legendary forbidden technique that Your Majesty mentioned. Therefore, I used the Holy Church in the outer wall to block the invention of this boy. I took him here and erased his original identity. I appointed him as an elder of the Dark Church in the outer wall. I wanted to wait for him to enrich his experience in all aspects before promoting him to be the new pope of the outer wall. I didn't expect that he would suddenly disappear. Gas system. Everyone's attention immediately fell on the divine incantation. One of them said, just from a name, it is indeed a bit similar to that forbidden incantation. One is called air, and the other is steam. Both seem to be related to air. The outer wall is a desolate place. How can it give birth to such a genius? If the divine incantation system that this person invented is really that forbidden technique, then this person is really a peerless genius. It's a pity that he isn't a member of our pure wall. His status is too low and not worth cultivating. The dean stared at M.O. Granong and said, Continue. M.O. Gland smiled and continued. I asked people in the outer wall to look for him after his disappearance, but there was no news. Not long ago, this person suddenly appeared. He took control of the Dark Church and used it to control the pontiff of the outer wall. Today, he sent troops to attack the military and defeated them. He completely controlled the 2 biggest chess pieces of the outer wall. What? The surrounding people were surprised. Although they didn't put the outer wall in their eyes, but they knew more or less about it under M.O. Grenang's control for so many years. A person who appeared in the outer wall didn't have any resources or background. But in such a short period of time, Mo Granong had taken control of the outer wall and unified it. This was simply a fantasy, but they knew that Mo Granong wasn't lying. This only showed that there was too much information worth digging. The dean's eyes narrowed as he looked at Mo Granong. As far as I know, the supervisors who were stationed in the outer wall are limitless. How did this youth deal with them? Mo Glang smiled and said, "That's what I wanted to talk about. In fact, besides the 5 proctors, one of my good friends was also killed by this young man. Her strength can be considered to be at the level of a pioneer. Although she's still a bit weaker than a real pioneer, it's not that far off. Not long ago, I sent her to the outer wall with 5 limitless to investigate the cause. But they didn't send back any news until today, when I sent someone to investigate in secret. The youth is still alive. Obviously, it means that my good friend is dead along with the 5 limitless. All the pioneers are dead?" The surrounding people were dumbfounded and shocked. Even in the inner wall, it wasn't easy to see pioneers. They were rare powerhouses. The dean narrowed his eyes as he stared at him. "Continue." Moglin smiled and said, "I thought that the boy used a hidden weapon or some kind of poison to kill them, but it was not the case. My spy saw a person when he was investigating. This person was the previous saintess, Aisha, who had died according to the news of the Dragon Clan some time ago." Everyone was shocked again. The previous saintess of the Dragon Clan appeared in the outer wall. If that was the case, then everything in front of them could be explained. But what did this mean? Did the Dragon Clan want to get their hands on the outer wall? Did they deliberately announce the news of the previous saintess' death to confuse them? When they thought of all the possibilities, everyone frowned. They felt a trace of worry, as if dark clouds were about to gather. The dean bowed his head in silence. After a moment, he slowly said, "Tell me what you think." Mo Granong looked at him. He was secretly afraid of the dean. He said, "Since we have found the root cause and know our goal, then there is only one problem. How to take back the outer wall from the hands of the Dragon Clan. I have 3 opinions on this point." "The dean, speak." "First, although I saw the traces of the previous saintess in the outer wall, but I didn't see it with my own eyes. The spy didn't dare to get close to observe, so he wasn't sure. So, I temporarily set it up. If this news is true, then there's a problem. As far as I know, although the previous saintess of the Dragon Clan and the current saintess are blood-related sisters, they do not have a harmonious relationship. Do you remember what the Dragon Clan announced when the saintess was replaced? They said that the previous saintess was temporarily removed from her position because of a crime. There is a rumor that the previous saintess was framed by Saintess Haley and lost her position. I think the credibility of this rumor is quite high." Moglin smiled. After all, the Dragon Clan's power has been flourishing since Aisha became the saintess. Wing Clan and Rock Clan have been completely suppressed by the Dragon Clan. They haven't been able to compete with the Dragon Clan in the Wasteland. Saintess Aisha's contribution to the Dragon Clan is obvious to all. There is only one possibility for the Dragon Clan to remove her due to a crime. She has committed an unforgivable crime. But think about it. What kind of person is Saintess Aisha? The Wing Clan and the Rock Clan have been painstakingly trying to kill her for so many years, but they haven't been able to hurt her. How could she be stupid enough to commit an unforgivable crime? So the possibility that she has been framed is very high. This is the key point. If she has been framed, then the hatred between her and Saintess Haley is a sharp blade that we can use. Everyone looked at each other and nodded slightly. They felt that the analysis was reasonable. The short old man, sitting at the opposite table, snorted. Although he was somewhat dissatisfied, but he knew that what the dean said was right. If the Dragon Clan really wants to attack the outer wall, then there is no need to send a saintess to preside over the overall situation. Dean was silent for a moment. There is a higher possibility that the saintess will seize the outer wall because of the removal of her position. She will hold a grudge against the dragons because of that. So she wants to take over the outer wall and compete with the dragons. Chapter 666. Go on with your second point. Dean didn't agree or deny. It seemed that he wanted to listen to other ideas. Moglin knew what he was worried about, but he didn't expose it. The second point is to use the military. I just said that this person has ruled the military of the outer wall. Such a move will inevitably anger the military. For so many years, we have been giving some face to the military of the outer wall. We don't want to offend the military when the time is not ripe. But he did it. An old man nodded. This is a good idea. The military will not sit back and do nothing. We can send them to take the lead and hide the information about this boy. Let them collide with us and see if they can find out anything we don't know yet. Although this person may be a genius, but he is too young and his mind is not clear. He wants to unify the outer wall. It's really pitiful and ridiculous. Another old man wearing a black and white striped hat sneered. Although the outer wall is an abandoned land, but after all, it is the territory of His Majesty. This person is really stupid to want to rule the outer wall. What's your third point? Moglin glanced at them and saw that they were leaning towards him. He smiled. The third point is to wait and see. Although I'm not sure whether the woman beside this boy is the real Saintess Aisha, I'm sure that he has the power to kill pioneers. If we kill him personally, we need at least 2 pioneers to kill him. The safest way is 3 pioneers, so that he has no chance to escape. It's foolproof. However, in this way, we have to mobilize the pioneers in each branch, which will affect too many people, and the loss outweighs the gain. Fortunately, this boy is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant, so we don't need to do it ourselves to recapture the outer wall. Isn't it the most satisfying thing to borrow someone else's knife to kill our enemy? Dean touched his beard. You are the most familiar with the situation of the outer wall. I will leave this matter to you. First inform the military and the dragon family, and see their reaction. Yes, Dean, Moglin respectfully replied. Master, you're back. Barton rushed out of the hall to greet Dudian. Dean nodded slightly. He was relieved to see him safe and sound. He glanced at the wall builders who were digging the trenches. Is it going well? It's going well. Barton laughed. They're all excellent wall builders. They're very good at repairing giant walls. Remodeling the shrine is just a piece of cake. Dudian nodded. Did Riley come back? I haven't seen Mr. Riley yet. Barton shook his head, a hint of worry in his eyes. Did something happen? I won't. Dean patted Sergei's shoulder and led Aisha to the side hall. He called Sergei, called Gwyneth and Glenn. Also tell Noyce to come here. Yes, young master. Sergei nodded, then turned and left. Dean asked Barton to get Aisha's lunch after Sergei left. He started to work on his own matters after feeding her. The temple was being remodeled. He intended to build it into his future stronghold. The wall builders dug trenches to facilitate the burying of cables. The reason why he chose this place as a stronghold was very simple. Wutuo Mountain was the highest mountain in the outer wall. It was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Moreover, there was a cliff behind the temple. It was convenient to discharge pollution from power generation. He knew that the real battle would come after he poked the hornet's nest of the military. But he wasn't worried. He knew that the inner wall wouldn't put him in their eyes for a while. He had enough time to perfect his layout. The invention could only give him protection. But if he blindly defended, then sooner or later he would be penetrated. He had to counterattack and attack at the same time. You said that you can't fully stimulate the magic mark's ability without a magic hunter. Only the Monster Research Institute can develop a magic hunter. Dean looked at Aisha next to him. His eyes were misty, as if he was looking at an unreachable distance. I can only be regarded as half a primary limitless. The transformation effect of the legendary deified magic mark is too strong. If I continue to evolve, my body will mutate, and it will be permanent and irreversible. I can only develop a magic tool before that happens. I don't know what level of person in the Monster Research Institute is able to develop a magic tool. It's time to explore it. His eyebrows slightly wrinkled as he pondered. It didn't take long for Sergei, Noyce, Glenn, and the others to arrive. Master, they're coming, Sergei said while panting. Thanks for your hard work. Dean looked at Gwyneth and Glenn. Do you remember the last time I took you to the inner wall? I need you to go to the inner wall. I remember. Gwyneth's eyes lit up. Master, what is it? Go and investigate the level of person in the Monster Research Institute who could develop a magic tool. Dean stared at Glenn. Your Blackweaver magic marks are good at lurking. I'll leave this matter to you. Glenn suddenly felt a trace of pressure and asked, Am I going alone? Gwyneth has other tasks. Dean said, You don't have to worry about the situation of the inner wall. Gwyneth will give you a detailed introduction. You can find a map of the inner wall. As far as I know, there should be many branches of the Monster Research Institute. You only need to sneak into the remote Monster Research Institute. Although your strength is far behind the inner wall, but you are at the peak of Senior Hunter. I'll help you evolve your physique to the primary limitless level. That would be a good level for a guard in the inner wall. Gwyneth and Glenn were relieved after hearing his words. Glenn nodded. I'll try my best to complete the task. The time limit is 24 hours. The sooner the better. Dean solemnly said, We will encounter very strong enemies. The longer we delay, the more dangerous it will be for us. I know, Glenn said solemnly. Dean nodded and looked at Gwyneth. Your task is to go to the inner wall and investigate the underground structure of the cities. I need a map of the sewers in the inner wall. Gwyneth was surprised, as she didn't know why Dean wanted this information. But it was a good thing for her to return to the inner wall. I know, Master. I'll give you 24 hours. Once the time is up, you must come back, no matter how much you have completed. Dean looked at her. Gwyneth lowered her head. I promise to complete the task. Go. Dean waved his hand. The military will transport a batch of God's marrows. I've left a portion for both of you. You can go to Barton to get it. Gwyneth's eyes lit up. Thank you, Master. After the two left, Noyce asked, Young Master, what about me? You will stay by my side. Dean said, Your magic marks can digest poison. I'm worried that someone will try to assassinate me. You will help me test the poison in my meals in the future. Noyce came to his senses. Dean had almost been poisoned when he lived in the castle, so it wasn't strange for him to stay by Dean's side. Moreover, he felt a different warmth from Dean. It was obvious that Dean had great trust in him. Sergei looked at Noyce and sighed in his heart. After all, they had come out of the prison together. Revolutionary feelings were different. Sergei, are my two classmates still in the castle? Dudian asked. Sergei knew that Dean was referring to Mason and Zach. They are in the castle. Contact Hawkeye of the 9th Region and ask him to take them to exercise. In addition, give them rare magic marks. Be sure to let them grow as fast as possible. Dudian said. He had a lot of feelings for Mason and Zach. They supported each other when they were scavengers. He had saved them many times, and they had also saved him. Their kindness was far deeper than other people's. Although Sham's matter made him disappointed, but it didn't affect his opinion of Mason and Zach. He believed that these two were his companions that he had supported for many years. As long as they were given resources and opportunities, they would certainly be able to achieve something. Sometimes, many people just lacked an opportunity. Successful people were able to find opportunities and create opportunities. The other part of the people were excellent, but lacked the vision to find opportunities. If they were given an opportunity, then they might be able to make a big achievement. Mason and Zach belonged to this category. With Dean's current status and resources, it would be a piece of cake for him to cultivate several senior hunters. It wouldn't be difficult for him to cultivate a limitless expert, but he couldn't inject too much blessing at time. Even if he injected it at the highest frequency, it would take a week or two. However, Dean wanted to train both of them. In addition to strength, he wanted to train both of them with wisdom. He knew that all the things he had seen along the way had subverted his original perception. He didn't want the two of them to suddenly see him do something that was beyond their understanding. Let them go to the dark church. Sergei looked at Dudian and quickly understood his thoughts. There was an inexplicable, strange feeling in his heart. It was like an inexplicable sadness. He felt that the boy who was standing at the top was a bit sad, but he didn't dare to show his thoughts. Although Dudian's attitude towards him was no different from others, but he knew that he couldn't be compared with Dudian's two childhood friends. And bring Artemis and Gabriel. Dudian almost missed the two little guys. His eyes lit up when he thought of Artemis's green hair, which was completely different from the others. I know. Sergei bowed his head. You and Noyce will get a portion of the god's marrow after the military has moved over. You have to become limitless as soon as possible so that you can deal with the incoming enemies. Dean said. Sergei was startled. He bowed his head. Thank you, Master. Noyce also said, Thank you, Master. Go. Shortly after Sergei left, Barton rushed to the side hall and excitedly said, Master, Joseph is back. Dean's eyes lit up. Bring him. Barton hurriedly turned and ran. After a while, he came back with several people. The leader was Riley. Riley knelt down as he saw Dadian. Greetings, Master. I have brought the person you asked me to pick up. Get up, Dean said as he looked at the person behind him. It was Joseph, who he had placed in the military. It had been a long time since they last met, and the current Joseph was completely different from what he remembered. His skin was tanned, and his body was bronze in color. His body was well-defined and full of strength. It was obvious that he had suffered a lot in the army. He stood up and greeted, You're finally here. Joseph was startled as he looked at Dean. He couldn't believe that this was the headquarters of the Holy Church. His impression of Barton was that he was always dressed sloppily, but at the moment he was wearing a gorgeous pontiff robe. Dean's complexion was pale, but the change wasn't obvious. He looked a bit weak and haggard. However, no matter how he looked at it, he couldn't see any familiar shadow. It was as if it was a completely different person, making him feel somewhat unfamiliar. However, with Dean's words, there was a kind of warmth in his heart. The previous strangeness dissipated in an instant. He excitedly hugged Dean and said, I thought I would never see you again. How could it be? Dean patted his shoulder. How are you? I didn't expect you to be so muscular after staying in the army for a while. Barton jokingly punched Joseph's chest. Joseph suddenly felt a strong sense of closeness. His eyes became slightly moist, and he gave Barton a big hug. Dean talked with Joseph for a long time. He thought of Riley. Riley, you go back. Barton, you should think about giving him a reward. Barton patted his head. That's right, but what should I give him? He blushed as he thought about it. Although he was the pontiff, he didn't know about the treasures of the Holy Church. He was clear about the position, but he knew that Dean's attitude towards Riley couldn't be included in the Holy Church. After all, Dean had suddenly disappeared in the Holy Church. If he returned to the Holy Church, then it would inevitably cause unwarranted speculation. Take your time. I don't think Riley is in a hurry, right? Dean said. Riley respectfully replied, Yes, Master. Dean talked with Joseph for a moment after Riley left. Barton took him to rest while he continued to busy himself with his own matters. Another day passed in the blink of an eye. Under the pressure of both the Vatican and the military, the next day's morning papers and special reports did not publicize the war between the Vatican and the military. Instead, they said that the two sides had reached an agreement amicably, obscuring the fact that Bryson was a follower of the Dark Church. This was also the method that the military and the Vatican had used to cover up the truth. It could be said that practice made perfect. Richelieu returned to the Holy Church at noon the next day. He reported to Dean, Master, the military has been adjusted. All the generals have been replaced by our people. The 3 commanders have been replaced. I have appointed Bishop Elnarin to temporarily supervise the military, but he won't show up. Well, I'll leave the military to you. I'll look for you if there's a problem. On the dining table, Dean used a knife to insert a piece of medium-rare beef dripping with blood and gave it to Aisha to eat. He tried to slowly change her eating taste. First, she changed from human meat to beef. Now, he gradually heated the beef for her to eat. He hoped that one day, she would be able to happily eat medium-rare beef. In that case, his heart would feel a little better. At least he didn't have to look at her every time she ate. He believed that she wouldn't like her current appearance. Richelieu looked at him and lowered his head. Master, we have taken down the military. The magistrate and the Knights' Hall are nothing to be afraid of. Should we take advantage of the situation and take them down? No hurry, Dean said. We have attracted the attention of the inner wall. Now we have to find a way to deal with the anger of the military and the monastery. As for the magistrate and the Knights' Hall, we don't need to worry about them as long as they don't cause us trouble. If they dare to make trouble, then we will destroy them. Richelieu knew that the biggest problem was the inner wall. He asked, "Master, do you have a way to deal with them?" Chapter 667, Making Forbidden Techniques. Richelieu's face changed. The reason why forbidden techniques were classified as forbidden techniques was because they were too destructive and could easily destroy the giant wall. Or they were too cruel and could destroy human nature. However, Dean was going to use such forbidden techniques. It could be said that he was going to do anything in pursuit of victory. Master, some of these forbidden techniques need to be fully activated. Some of them require a large number of human subjects to be used for experiments. I'm afraid that the dark cultists will arrest people and make a big mess. Richelieu carefully said. He knew that the only way to stop Dean wasn't to destroy too much, but to sacrifice too many lives. It doesn't matter. This is the time for the Holy Church to establish its prestige. Dean indifferently said, the frequent activities of the dark cultists will make people feel the fear of being attacked by the dark cultists. They will become more dependent on the Holy Church. Even those who secretly complain about us won't dare to say anything. After all, we only need to suppress the dark cultists, and we can make up for all other mistakes. You have to know that people are selfish and forgetful. No matter what you have done in the past, as long as you can protect them in times of crisis, they will be grateful to you. Dean looked down at him. You used to do this kind of thing? I don't think I need to explain it in detail. Richelieu's face changed. He admitted that Dean was right from the point of view of interests, but he had to deny one point. Although he had done the same thing in the past, but the degree of grasp was very heavy. He had blocked the forbidden techniques and wouldn't touch them easily. Although this was the intention of the monastery, but he had the same idea in his heart. After all, it was easy to get out of control in chaos. I know. He lowered his head. He knew that Dean had made up his mind. It was useless to say more. He didn't continue to persuade Dean. After all, it was dangerous for him to persuade Dean. Moreover, the civilians wouldn't know that he had done this kind of thing. He didn't want to be a hero. He didn't have that kind of tragic and heroic feeling. The way of thinking about interests had long penetrated into his bone marrow. If what I read in the history books is true, then the sighing wall was built by the inner wall. Dean's eyes looked out of the window into the distance. He could see the sighing wall from the top of the mountain. Of course, it was difficult for ordinary people to see it, but it wasn't difficult for him and Richelieu to see it clearly. Richelieu was surprised as he didn't know what Duddy meant. He bowed his head. Yes, there was no distinction between the inner and outer walls of the giant wall. But because of a sudden disaster, most of the survivors migrated to the inner wall area. That is the core area of the giant wall. Then they built the side wall in this isolated area. Everyone who was born in the outer wall wants to cross the wall. Do you also want to? Duddy said. Richelieu looked at him, thought for a moment, and said honestly, I have thought about it. Thought about it? Why didn't you think about it later? Is it because you have enjoyed the taste of comfort after becoming the pontiff? You are too lazy to fight? There was a trace of embarrassment on Richelieu's face. Although Dean's words were very straightforward, but did hit the nail on the head. The older he was, the more he didn't want to move. He didn't want to struggle. After all, he was already standing at the top of the world. If he continued to struggle, then it was very likely that he would have nothing. We have to count on the wall for the war. Dean indifferently said. This time the inner wall will be eager to break the wall. They might even hate the wall, just like how you hated the wall in the past. Richelieu was startled. He was puzzled, but didn't ask much. He felt that the youth was planning something. Go to your work. Duddy waved. Inner wall. Dragon clan's territory. The Dragon clan was one of the 3 major families. Their territory was extremely vast. The clan's territory was comparable to a large city. As for the garrisons that were built near the cities, it was even more huge. At this moment, on the Holy Maiden Peak of the Dragon clan, Hathaway was practicing with her spear in the public square. A giant spear danced in her slender hands like a ferocious dragon, its momentum swift and fierce. The surrounding servants didn't dare to make the slightest sound. The Saint's Peak was completely different from the time when Aisha was in charge. The mountain was no longer desolate and desolate. The best craftsmen had been invited to transform the buildings into the style that she liked. The floors were renovated and the mountain roads were full of servants. It was like a fortress with iron walls. Even if a bird were to invade, it would be shot down. On the steps at the end of the square, a middle-aged man with an extremely pale face and a figure as light as a feather quietly floated over like a ghost. He walked without any wind, but he was incomparably agile. He quietly came to the side of the field where Hathaway was practicing her spear and stood there, watching her practice. Hathaway had noticed him a long time ago. When he came over, she flicked her wrist and finished practicing the last dragon stab. She immediately put away her spear and turned her head to ask, "Sir, what's the matter?" She knew that if it wasn't something important, he wouldn't come looking for her personally. "Miss, I just got the news from the monastery. I heard that the spies of the monastery saw your sister in the outer wall." The middle-aged man went straight to the point. Haley's eyes widened. She stabbed the spear into the ground. "Impossible. She's dead. It's impossible for her to be alive." "I know, but the news from the monastery shouldn't be false. There must be something fishy about it," the middle-aged man said. "It's impossible." Haley clenched the spear. "No matter what, it's impossible for her to be alive. Back then, what we encountered was a great corpse king that had evolved its consciousness, and she was seriously injured. I saw it with my own eyes. She couldn't have survived. Her demon hunting tool was left in the wilderness for so long, and it wasn't recovered. How could she still be alive?" The middle-aged man's eyes flashed. He didn't expect that after such a long time, it would make her so excited. It was difficult for her to control her emotions. He sighed in his heart. It seemed that the shadow of that person was too big for her since childhood. "As far as I know, the monastery has been secretly operating the isolated outer wall. I don't know why they're doing this, but I have sent people to the outer wall. The outer wall isn't as desolate and barren as we had imagined. However, I don't see any value in it." The middle-aged man said, "The area there is too small. The people who are left there are inferior people. The people who have been expelled to the outer wall are servants of nobles and criminals. They are inferior people with inferior bloodlines. The descendants of them are the same. However, I have seen a ridiculous phenomenon in the outer wall. The aristocratic servants who have been expelled from the outer wall actually call themselves nobles. They also imitate the Psi wall to build an isolation wall to separate the inferior people. It's really ignorant." Haley's heart was upset. She frowned. "Do you still care about this?" The middle-aged man saw that she was disgusted and smiled. "There has been turmoil in the outer wall recently. The monastery's forces in the outer wall have been pulled out. It is said that pioneers have been sent to solve the problem. The result was that the pioneers were killed. Some people have seen people like your sister appear in the outer wall, so I think we need to investigate." "Her name is Aisha, not my sister," Haley said word by word. The pale-faced middle-aged man was slightly startled. He immediately smiled and said, "All right, I was wrong." Only then did Hathaway look away from his face. She said coldly, "I understand what you want to say. I will let Eleanor investigate this matter." Chapter 668. Glenn reported to Dudian, "Master, I sneaked into a branch of the Monster Research Institute in the inner wall and asked the staff. They said that there are many levels of difficulty in casting the magic tool. It mainly depends on the materials and grade of the magic tool. If you want to make a top legendary magic tool, then you need to have a doctor." "Doctor?" Dean, who was thinking, heard the term. He was puzzled. Was it a coincidence, or was it a name inherited from the old era? If it was the latter, then it meant that the inner wall had clues about the old era. But he didn't know how much they had. He had been to the inner wall, but didn't see any electric tools. It showed that even the inner wall didn't have the ability to generate electricity. Is it really just a coincidence? Dudian frowned. From the environment of the inner wall, it didn't seem like they had mastered the knowledge of the old era. Otherwise, the language system wouldn't have changed completely. One had to know that creating a new language system was extremely difficult, and it was difficult to complete it in a short 300 years. Moreover, compared to the language system of the olden era, he discovered that the language system they were using now was completely comparable to the Chinese characters of the olden era. Chinese characters were the only high-level language in the world in the old era. It had been precipitated for thousands of years, but the language system they were using now was not inferior to Chinese characters. Master? Glenn saw that Dudian didn't speak for a long time. She was perturbed as she called out to him. Dean reacted, and his thoughts were interrupted. He frowned slightly and said, "Go on. I have investigated. Doctor is a very high-level title in the Monster Research Institute. There's a rank above doctor. Generally, a doctor will serve as the director of the branch." Glenn said, "The Grand Doctor rarely shows up. He usually only studies legendary monster-level projects. As for the rare monster-level projects, the Grand Doctor is in charge of them." "Doctor?" Dudian was inexplicably relieved. "You have worked hard to find so much information in just one day. What happened to your shoulder? Is it hurt?" Glenn looked at her right hand. She didn't expect Dudian's eyes to be so sharp. She smiled. "It's just a small injury. It's not a big deal. Master doesn't have to worry about it. Noise, go and ask the priest to come and treat Glenn." Dudian ordered Noise. "Yes, Master." Noise nodded and silently retreated. Glenn felt a trace of warmth in her heart. She didn't continue to refuse. "Young Master, in addition to this information, I also saw some strange things when I sneaked into the Monster Research Institute. I don't know how to describe them. Well, let me think. There were some big green jars. They looked like jars filled with green liquid. There were some strange creatures soaked in them. Some were monsters, but some were monsters with human heads and demon bodies. It looked like a human head was grafted onto a monster's body." At this point, she once again recalled the faces of the creatures that seemed to be sleeping in the green jars, and instinctively felt a chill down her spine. Monsters with human heads? There was a trace of coldness in Dean's eyes as he thought about the things that Hidovan had told him. Every year, the military would transport a large number of people from slums and civilian areas to the Monster Research Institute in the Inner Wall. These people included men, women, children, elderly, and other people of different types and ages. It seemed that the Monster Research Institute was committed to studying the relationship between humans and monsters. However, he didn't know whether this cruel and destructive research was an open secret or a private experiment of the Monster Research Institute. However, to him, this might be good news. The Monster Research Institute used a large number of humans as experimental targets. It meant that they were likely to study people who were infected by undead. It was very likely that they would find a way to restore Aisha's original consciousness. This was a faint hope, but it made him feel very excited. After a moment, the priest came and took Glenn to heal. Gwyneth returned not long after Glenn had gone down. Dean didn't expect her to come back. He knew that the girl's heart wasn't with him after the previous events. Perhaps it was because of his actions that made it difficult for the girl to accept. He had long expected such a situation. That's why he sent Mason and Zach to Hawkeye for training. Gwyneth was different from Glenn and Noyce. She had experienced the feeling of being surrounded by darkness in Thornflower Prison. Her previous life was like a piece of white paper. White paper didn't refer to ignorance, but pure. As a punisher of the magistrate, he didn't know that most of the ideas instilled in her were hatred towards the dark believers and all kinds of lawbreakers. Even though she was imprisoned as a scapegoat and tortured cruelly, this young girl was not like the others. She did not completely sink into the abyss to take revenge on the world. She still had a conscience in her heart. He had already seen this and expected that sooner or later she would leave him because she could not stand what he had done. White and black could never coexist. They could only oppose each other, unless he dyed her black. "You're back." Dean quietly looked at her, his mind turning. Gwyneth silently came in front of Dean and saluted. "Master, I'm back. I've completed the task that you have given me." "Really?" Dean's eyes narrowed. "Have you checked the underground sewer structure of all the large cities in the inner wall?" Gwyneth bowed. "Yes, Master." "Let me see." Gwyneth handed over a stack of snow paper from her backpack. Dean took the paper and looked at it. Each of them had a clear map of the underground sewer structure and the general appearance of the entire city. His face sank as he looked at Gwyneth. "Did you draw all of these?" Gwyneth shook her head. "I found them from the city defense department. They're the latest drawings of the city." Dean's face softened. It would be a big problem if Gwyneth said that she drew them herself. In just 24 hours, it would be very difficult for her to travel to all the cities. Moreover, it would be very difficult for her to draw so many exquisite drawings, even with her speed. Connections? I didn't expect that you would have acquaintances after so many years. Dean looked at her. They should know that you have been arrested and imprisoned. Why didn't they report you to the military? Gwyneth lowered her head. They are my relatives. They won't leak any information. Dean narrowed his eyes. Haven't you gone to see the Laporte family? Are they doing well? Gwyneth's body trembled. The name Laporte was like a dark cloud in her life, covering all her hope and light. It was also the existence that she always wanted to tear apart. I didn't go. Her fingers clenched into a fist. Her chest slightly moved up and down. Dean knew that her only purpose was to use his strength to destroy the Laporte family in the inner wall. She couldn't do it by herself. After all, she was just a Sun Metal level Punisher. Although she had obtained God's marrow and had primary limitless strength, but she was too weak in front of the nobles. Even if she used sneak attacks, she could only assassinate 1 or 2 people. She would lose her life. That's why she was sent to the Thornflower prison. The Laporte family was still prosperous, and only 1 or 2 leaves were lost. I didn't expect you to have relatives. You must miss them after so many years. Dean said, I would have given you more time to get together with them. If there is an opportunity, then bring them here. It's much safer than the inner wall. Gwyneth bowed her head and said, Thank you, young master, for your kindness. Although she said yes, she knew that this is impossible. She had seen Richelieu being threatened by Dean because of his grandson's life. How could she drag her relatives into the sea of fire? Gwyneth didn't have any regrets as long as she could get revenge. Even if she had to sacrifice herself, she wouldn't have any regrets. But she didn't want to implicate other people. You go and take a rest. Dean didn't say much as he signaled her to leave. He looked at the drawings in his hand and counted them. There were 13 drawings in total. Although he didn't know the percentage of the total population of the inner wall occupied by the 13 cities, but the effect should be the same as he expected if the plan was implemented. Thinking of this, he handed the blueprints to Noyce and said, Find someone to make 2 copies of each of these blueprints. Yes, young master. Noyce took the drawings. Dean and Aisha were the only ones left in the empty temple after Noyce left. Dean looked at her face. I'll get you back soon. Aisha was silent. Dean smiled as he saw her reaction, but there was a bit of sadness in his heart. He touched her cold hand and kissed it. After a long time, he let go of her hand. He got up and went to the desk next to him. He continued to create his next invention. Now that he had electricity, he could create more things. What they needed the most right now, and it just so happened that they could produce it with their current level of craftsmanship, was the biological sensor. He didn't have to worry about sneak attacks if he used it with a lightning barrier. After all, although Aisha's perception ability was superior, she was good at hiding magic marks. Some of them might not be perceived by her, but the biological sensor he was going to make was more comprehensive. It could detect from the heat source reaction, biological magnetic field, and the echo of the ground. Even if he could hide the heat source and the sound of footsteps, it would be difficult to hide the biological magnetic field emitted by the body. If the device couldn't detect the enemy, then it was basically omnipotent. After a day and a night of reconstruction, the temple had been completely transformed into his design. Although there were not many changes on the outside, there were cables buried in the pillars and under the floor of the temple. Some of the artworks, vases, and sculptures in the temple all had hidden activation mechanisms. Once the mechanism was activated, all the wires in the temple would be charged. As long as they were touched, they would turn into light bulbs. Chapter 669. OM. A bee flew over the leaves in front of her. Eleanor didn't pay attention to it. She stuck her body close to the tree. The rough bark rubbed against her smooth skin. It was very uncomfortable, but she knew that she had to endure it. It was possible that the saintess was living in the temple 300 meters away. If she was aware that she was here, then it wouldn't be as simple as discomfort. It had been half an hour since she had sneaked into the most heavily guarded mountain in the outer wall. Moreover, she had found an excellent observation angle. As long as she didn't get close to the range of 200 meters and didn't have killing intent, then she believed that even if Aisha was here, she wouldn't be able to detect her existence. She had verified this point many years ago when she had sneaked into the Saint's Peak. There are two people scents. One of them has a male sweat smell. The information said that she has a teenager beside her. He is inseparable from her. The smell should be that boy's. Eleanor's eyes glanced to the temple. She was a master who had experienced hundreds of battles. She could detect if someone was looking at her from a distance. The other person's smell is a little similar to hers. It should be her, but the smell is mixed with the smell of blood and decay. It's a bit strange. She gently sniffed and collected the smell from the temple in front of her. There was some doubt in her heart. She was 70% sure that the other person in the temple was Aisha. She didn't die outside the giant wall, as Haley had said. However, she knew Haley's temperament. She knew that 70% certainty wouldn't satisfy her. She could only continue to wait until she confirmed it with her own eyes. She waited for half an hour. 10 minutes ago, she saw a figure walking over from the window of the shrine. It was the young man who had given her the information. He had pitch-black hair, and he stood alone by the window. He held something that looked like a paper roll in his mouth, and he lit it up and puffed out smoke. When the smoke came out, it immediately made her feel nauseous. The smell was pungent and unpleasant, but looking at the youth's appearance, he didn't seem to care about the smell. He inhaled and exhaled the odorous smoke. His face didn't seem to be enjoying it, nor did it seem to be rejecting it. He seemed to be thinking about something. She looked at the corner of the window. She didn't see Aisha. She was a little disappointed, but she thought it was very kind that Aisha could tolerate such a strange smell under the same roof as Aisha with her misophobia character. Time passed quickly. It was lunchtime in the blink of an eye. She had been waiting for this moment for a long time. She saw the young man in the robe of the Pope enter the hall with his attendants. She smelled a fragrant aroma from the food covered by the lids. At the same time, she also smelled the pungent smell of blood. It was clearly raw meat. Moreover, it was the smell of raw beef. It smelled like beef. She frowned slightly. Most of the raw beef was only slightly fried. It should be the boy's food. As for Aisha, she never liked to see blood. She always ate 80% cooked food. Not long after, lunch was over, and the attendants left with the cutlery. Eleanor continued to wait for a while, but didn't see anyone come out. She couldn't help but feel depressed in her heart. Did Aisha and the boy plan to stay inside all day? Why didn't they come out? At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there was still no movement inside. She was depressed and quietly came down from the tree. Several strange limbs slowly grew out of her chest and quickly dived into the ground. This was the ability of her magic mark. After diving into the ground, her eyes were still open, but her normal eyes were now completely white, as if she had rolled her eyes. Although there was no light source in her eyes, the surroundings were not pitch black, and the crowded sand and stones around her did not damage her eyes. If one looked carefully, they would find that there was a layer of transparent, crystal-like material protecting her eyes. She listened calmly. Her perception spread along the soil like a spider's web. It extended straight to the bottom of the temple. The soil under the temple was like a dark lake, calm as a mirror. At the moment, there was a little ripple in the middle of this dark lake. In her auditory perception, these ripples were 2 feet. The feet didn't move, but the limbs above the feet all the way to the chest had a beating heart. This weak beating transmitted a faint sound through the soles of the feet to the ground and then into her ears. In addition to the ability to distinguish hundreds of thousands of smells, her hearing was the strongest weapon. The heartbeat rate is stable, and there's only one person's movement. Eleanor looked at the soil in front of her without blinking. It seemed a bit scary. She listened more attentively. The previous smell clearly belonged to two people. Why was there only one person's movement? Could it be that she had already sensed his presence, so she concealed her movements? But even if she wanted to cover up, how could she cover up? Could it be that she was floating in the air inside the temple? After listening carefully for a long time, there was still no movement from the second person. The doubt in her heart slowly turned into fear. Could it be that she was existing like this, but she could not sense her? Was this her new ability? She could not think of an answer. After hesitating for a long time, she gritted her teeth. A few strange limbs grew out of her body and quickly pierced through the soil, pushing her body deeper into the ground. After diving 100 meters underground, she carefully approached the temple in front of her. A moment later, she came to the bottom of the temple and continued to crawl forward for a distance before stopping. There's a cliff in another meter. Once I go out, I might expose my scent. I'm too close. Her eyes flickered, and she laughed bitterly in her heart. This was really a tough job. But fortunately, she was prepared. She immediately took out a thin black pipe from her armor, pierced through the soil, and extended it outwards. When it reached the outside, she opened her mouth and sucked in a mouthful of soil. Using her teeth and lips, she then blew into the pipe. The strength of the breath was relatively strong, and the soil in the pipe was forced out. Because of the soil in her mouth, her breath was filled with the smell of soil. It was not easy to arouse suspicion, and most people would think that it was a mountain breeze. When the pipe was connected, she took out a thin wire and a lens the size of a finger cap. She used the thin wire to tie a small pinhole in the lens, then stuffed the lens into the thin pipe. She blew it out of the pipe and exposed it on the cliff. Then, she gently moved the thin wire and pulled the lens back into an extremely small V-shaped indentation at the mouth of the pipe, causing the lens to be tilted upward at a 50-degree angle. From this angle, she could see the situation on top of the cliff through the tube. This was her favorite observation method for many years. There weren't many materials, and it was easy to carry. Moreover, it was hidden and could be thrown away without being noticed. After making the observation tool, she took out the second tube and carefully pierced it out of the soil, exposing it outside the cliff. This tube had a curved arc. She took out a small red nail that she had prepared with her and inserted it into the tube. At the end of the red nail was a glass tube device, which was her unique design. At this moment, after adjusting the angle of the red nail and the tube, she took a deep breath from the surrounding soil and blew it out. The red nail shot out quickly and followed the curve of the pipe toward the cliff. It nailed into the cliff that was tens of meters above, and the sound was extremely soft. After doing this, she began to wait quietly. Not long after, there was a sudden rustling sound on the cliff. She saw some poisonous snakes and small poisonous lizards crawling up the steep cliff. These poisonous insects seemed to be summoned, crawling in the direction of the red nail. Eleanor looked through the thin pipe and waited attentively. Chapter 670. I want these materials to be transported as fast as possible. Dean passed the list of materials for the biological sensor to Sergei. In addition, asked the Dark Church to send 5 of the best alchemists in the metal field, especially Flophis, who wrote the book Mechanical Capacity. Yes, young master. I'll go, Sergei respectfully said as he received the list of materials. He had the highest pass from the Dark Church, so he could freely go in and out of the 12th region. Moreover, the elders of the 12th region recognized him, so it was very convenient for him to do things. Dean watched Sergei leave. He was about to prepare for the next invention when he heard a rustling sound from outside the window. Although it was extremely weak, but it didn't escape his ears. It seemed that a large number of reptiles were moving around the room. Dean's eyes lit up as he looked at Noyce. Call someone to check the back hall. Noyce also heard the movement from outside the hall. Master, I'll go and check. Dean glanced at him and signaled with his eyes. Noyce was startled as he saw Dean's eyes. He realized that the situation was unusual. I know, young master. After he finished speaking, he left the shrine and quickly returned with a holy knight, saying, Go to the rear hall to check. The paladin was trembling with fear as he respectfully agreed. He quickly walked to the back of the shrine to take a look. What he saw shocked him as he saw a large number of poisonous creatures crawling up the cliff at the back, densely packed together. It seemed that the poisonous creatures saw the paladin as they crawled towards him. One of them was a green toad that was about the size of a fist. It jumped towards the paladin's face. The paladin was scared as he retreated from the window. He instinctively pulled out his sword to block, but he remembered that he had left his sword outside the temple. He hurriedly left the hall and saw Noise waiting by the curtain. "My lord, there are a lot of poisonous insects crawling up. I'll call someone to clean them up." "Poisonous creatures?" Noise was startled. "You go back first and wait in the hall. There's no need to call people." "Yes, elder." The paladin bowed his head and ran out of the hall. Noise quickly returned to Dean's side. Dean asked, "It has always been calm. How can there be poisonous creatures?" Noise was surprised. "Master, what do you mean? A lot of people are jealous of us as we sit in this position. I think it's a prank." Dean looked at him. There was a glimmer of light in the depths of his eyes. "Call someone to come and clean up. Sprinkle insect repellent powder on the cliff to prevent such a thing from happening again." "Yes, master." Noise was about to leave, but Dean stopped him. "Take these things with you. They are disturbing my peace. Follow me to the side hall." Dean's eyes were fixed on him as he handed the paper and ink to him. Noise felt that Dean's eyes were on him. He looked at Dean and saw that Dean's eyes flashed. Noise winked at him. Noise was startled, but soon recovered. There was some doubt in his heart. Was there someone spying on them? Otherwise, what was the meaning of Dean's wink? Although he didn't understand, he didn't show it. After all, he had been in the Thornflower prison, so he still had the ability to hide it. Immediately, he obediently took the dew pen and ink and led the way out of the hall. Dean shook the bell and held Aisha's hand as they walked out of the hall. 1, 2, 3. Eleanor's ears were glued to the soil, so she could hear every word that was being said above her. Even though the sound was transmitted through the air instead of the ground, it was still transmitted through the bones of the human body to the ground. The only difference was that the sound was so weak that ordinary people wouldn't be able to hear it, but Eleanor could hear it clearly. When Dean stopped his attendants from coming over to check, she felt a trace of fear and nervousness. She didn't expect the teenager to react so quickly and be so cautious. However, such a situation was within her expectation. The poisonous insects would climb into the temple, and they would have to clean them up. At the same time, she would be able to find the position of the person suspected to be Aisha. At the moment, the teenager didn't choose to clean them up but left the temple. This made her feel relieved, but at the same time she was puzzled. The teenager looked cautious enough. Why would he mistake the poisonous insects as an attack from the outer wall? Was it because the method was too inferior? Or was it because he had too many enemies in the outer wall? Although there were doubts in her heart, her attention quickly followed the sound of footsteps. Her attention fell on the third set of footsteps, and the joy in her heart quickly turned into shock. From the image that came from her sense of hearing, she could clearly see the appearance of two people walking in the other two sets of footsteps, but this third set of footsteps was like a ghost, and she could only see the sound of 2 feet landing on the ground. In addition, there was no sound of heartbeat. There was no sound of internal organs shaking or gastric juices flowing. If she had to describe it, then it would be like a wooden person. She was bewildered. After hesitating for a moment, she decided to follow them and observe again. The monstrous limbs under her abdomen quickly fiddled with the soil, sneaking behind Dean and swimming toward the side hall. She was like a fish in the sea, shuttling freely in the soil. At this moment, she heard the people above enter a hall at the side. The young man said, "Close all the curtains." Soon the sound of curtains being pulled echoed. "Master, it's done. Come over. I have something to say to you." "Yes, master. These poisonous insects shouldn't be the work of the people from the outer wall. It should be the people from the inner wall," the teenager said as he pulled out a chair and sat down. Eleanor's heart tightened when she heard that. At the same time, her previous doubts were cleared up. It seemed that the little brat had deliberately misled her, thinking that she was watching him from afar when she released the venomous bugs. After all, lip reading wasn't a difficult task, especially for an assassin. However, the little brat was still a little brat, and he was too careless. He didn't know that she was investigating from underground. There was a trace of complacency and contempt in her heart. She listened more carefully. The people from the inner wall? The teenager's attendant was surprised. Did the monastery send someone again? The expert they sent last time was killed by you, young master. You said that the next time they send someone, it will definitely be a very powerful person. Now Shoo, lower your voice. The teenager reminded him. It could be the military. I didn't expect the people from the inner wall to act so quickly. It's time to prepare to annihilate the entire inner wall. My plan has been deployed. Inform them to prepare to start. The codename of the plan is Master. Your voice is too low. I can't hear you clearly. Be careful. The walls have ears. Come closer. Eleanor frowned. She couldn't hear the codename of the teenager. She knew that Dudian was going to repeat it. Although her goal was to find out whether Aisha was here or not, but the teenager's plan to annihilate the entire inner wall sounded like a boast. Although she didn't believe that the teenager could do it, but she was still very curious. After all, even if the plan couldn't annihilate the inner wall, it would have a very strong destructive power. Do you remember? The teenager asked. Upon hearing this, Eleanor was slightly taken aback. He's already done? She didn't hear it clearly. Master, your voice is too low. Why don't you write it down? The attendant said. All right. The teenager picked up the pen. There was a slight rustling sound. Eleanor listened carefully to the voice, trying to decipher the content of the young man's words through the strokes. However, she was soon dumbfounded because the young man's strokes were completely messed up. In other words, he had written one stroke for every word in a paragraph, and the strokes were not in sequence. Even if she listened to it 100 times, she would not be able to decipher what the young man had written. Master, I'll remember. Take this token with you. They will execute the plan only if they see it. Well, go through the secret passage. Yes, Master. Eleanor heard that the footsteps of the attendant were a lot heavier than before. The sound of his landing was louder than before, indicating that the weight of his body had increased. Combined with the token that Dean mentioned, it was obvious that the attendant was carrying something on his back. She hesitated. Should she continue to stay here and investigate Aisha's matter? Or should she go and see what the plan was? After thinking for a moment, she decided to go and see the plan first. Her intuition told her that she wouldn't be able to distinguish the authenticity of Aisha. If she could know the plan, then she would be able to go back and explain. After all, Hathaway asked her to come here to verify whether the monastery statement was true or not. From the current situation, although she couldn't confirm that this person was Aisha, at least she could confirm that the monastery's pioneers were killed. There was a pioneer-level powerhouse here. Moreover, she had seen this young man's face before. He was the person that Hathaway was looking for. By completing all of this, her mission could be considered a success. If she could find out about this plan and make use of it, perhaps it could be considered a great merit. Thinking of these, she immediately swam toward the attendant's footsteps. Very quickly, the attendant followed the secret passage downwards, getting closer and closer to her. She didn't rush to make a move. After waiting for a moment, the attendant went towards St. Mark's Square. It seemed that he was going to leave from there. There was a distance of thousands of meters from the direction of the temple. Moreover, it was in the secret passage 50 meters underground. She believed that if she made a move here, it would never be noticed by Aisha in the temple. Whoosh! Chapter 671. Bang! Noyce was shocked when he heard the sound coming from the wall. He hurriedly turned his head and saw a horrifying scene. He saw a woman with a hideous body rushing out of the rock wall. Her face was full of killing intent. So fast, Noyce saw the speed at which she was rushing towards him. He felt a sense of death that he had never felt before. His whole body was cold, and the next moment, he felt his body lighten. Then there was a loud bang, and the splashing gravel hit his face. He hurriedly looked up and saw the sunlight shining. The rock wall next to him was pierced. He stared at the outside of the passage. At this moment, two slender figures were entangled together. "It's you. It's really you." Eleanor looked at Aisha in horror. Her brain was buzzing. She didn't expect to see her again. Moreover, she was so close to her. The moment she broke through the ground, she saw that the servant was carrying something wrapped in black cloth. She knew that it was the token that the youth had mentioned, but she didn't expect that the token was actually Aisha herself. Roar! Aisha's face was ferocious. Her sharp nails tightly grasped Eleanor's shoulder as she bit her face. Eleanor looked at Aisha's ferocious face. She couldn't believe that this was the invincible Aisha that she had seen in the past. That always indifferent face with a faint smile on it was so ferocious and bloodthirsty at this moment. She didn't dare to delay. She instantly stimulated the ability of her magic marks. The demon hunting tool hidden in the armor on her back trembled slightly. It instantly pierced into her body and merged with her body. Gotcha! A layer of sticky black paint gushed out of the pores on her skin. It was as thick as oil and quickly solidified into a pitch-black, glossy carapace. At the same time, a few sharp barbs grew out of the spine on her back. The monstrous limbs on her abdomen seemed to have completely stretched out and were 2 to 3 meters long. Her face was also covered by a black substance. Her silky hair had long disappeared and turned into a black, forked blade. There were greenish-yellow spots in her pupils, and her vision was completely different from before. This was the complete form of her magic marks. It was hideous, ugly, and disgusting, but it had super strength. Hiss! She screamed angrily, but her voice had changed. She issued a hissing sound like a poisonous lizard. Several strange limbs on her abdomen pushed forward and slapped on Aisha's chest. Bang! Aisha's body was instantly forced to retreat. At the same time, the distance was pulled apart. At this time, she noticed that Aisha's eyes were completely black like 2 deep pools. Her heart was shocked. She had seen this kind of evil eyes outside the giant wall. It was on the Corpse King's body. She suddenly thought of Hathaway's words. Could it be that Aisha was infected by the Corpse King? She immediately felt a chill in her heart and hurriedly looked at her shoulder where she had been scratched. Fortunately, she reacted in time, and the demonic carapace protected her body, so she was not scratched. She knew that the intensity of the virus active in the Corpse King's body was by no means killed by the antibodies in her body, especially the Corpse King of Aisha's level. Roar! Aisha roared and pounced again, this time faster. Eleanor's face changed. She didn't dare to stay any longer, so she turned and ran. She was not Aisha's opponent at all. Although the corpse would degenerate the brain and the combat awareness would not be as good as before, but the physique after the corpse was several times stronger than before. She couldn't imagine that with Aisha's previous physique, who could stop her after turning into a corpse? She just wanted to escape and tell the terrible news to Hathaway and the Dragon Clan. Before Eleanor's attack, in the temple, Dean sat silently, staring at the ground in front of him. His pupils shrank into a black dot. The soil under the floor was penetrated layer by layer by his X-ray vision. He could see all kinds of buried stones and cables. In the deeper place, there was a woman who didn't emit the slightest heat. She was swimming towards the place where Noise had gone. He got up and chased after them after about 500 meters away from the temple. Dean saw Aisha and Eleanor rush out of the secret passage after a few seconds. He immediately chased after them. On the battlefield, Eleanor pushed Aisha away and turned around to run. Suddenly, the bell rang. Dean stood on the high slope outside the secret passage. He shook the bell in his hand. The sound was clearly passed into Aisha's ears. He was relieved. Fortunately, he came in time. If he was a step late, then the person might have slipped away. Upon hearing the ringing of the bell, Eleanor hurriedly glanced over and saw that the little brat from the temple had actually appeared here. Her expression changed slightly as she instantly knew that her whereabouts had long been exposed. The conversation between the young man and the servant was just to lure her out. Damn! She was angry, but she didn't have time to kill the youth. She could only endure. Aisha, who was chasing after her, heard the ringing of the bell. Her body trembled slightly and stopped. Roar! She suddenly roared into the sky, and all the bones in her body made cracking sounds. The clothes on her back were torn apart, and two large chunks of flesh protruded out. These chunks of flesh quickly turned into two dragon wings, dark red in color, and the membrane on the surface of the flesh was stained with blood. It looked extremely ferocious. It was completely different from the dragon wings that she had previously displayed, which were covered with feathers. Instead, it looked more like the dragon wings that Hathaway had displayed. Dudian knew that at the moment she was relying on the power of her magic marks. She didn't have the assistance of the blood vessel, so her strength was greatly reduced. But even so, she shouldn't be underestimated. She was even stronger than Haley. Eleanor heard the roar behind her and hurriedly glanced over. Her expression immediately changed. She quickly waved the monstrous limb in front of her chest and dug into the soil. She couldn't fly, so she could only hide in the soil. Fortunately, this ability was better than flying. After all, she could be shot down if she flew in the sky. But it would be very difficult to deal with her if she was in the soil. Roar! Aisha's transformation ended quickly, and the moment the transformation of the soles of her feet was over, she rushed out impatiently. The speed of the dragon wings made the distance of hundreds of meters between them disappear in an instant. But Eleanor's reaction was fast enough. She drilled into the soil and rushed straight down before Aisha could catch up. There was no cave outside the soil that she drilled into. She drilled into the soil and covered the passage. This was the terrifying part of her ability. Chapter 672. Eleanor, who had burrowed into the soil, swam at full speed as she frantically fled for her life. All of a sudden, a loud rumble came from her back, as though a huge mountain was pressing down on her back. The force was unimaginably heavy. She spat out a mouthful of blood, and the monstrous limbs that were crawling beneath her abdomen were instantly immobilized by the pressure. One of the limbs instantly snapped when it collided with the soil, causing fresh blood to flow out and seep into the soil. She was horrified. Aisha's power was more terrifying than she had imagined. Was this really the power of a pioneer? She didn't care about the pain and hurriedly twisted the strange limbs to push away the compacted soil. She continued to crazily drill down. Her life and death were in a matter of seconds. Roar! Aisha's pitch-black eyes revealed a ferocious anger. It seemed that she was furious because her prey had escaped. She raised her head and roared. The huge dragon wings on her back suddenly twisted and the muscles on them wriggled like worms. It seemed that there were some twisting, poisonous snakes wrapped in the flesh. The next moment, these twisting muscles suddenly extended along the edge of the dragon wings and turned into blood-red spikes. The spikes drew an arc in the air and suddenly pierced the ground under her feet. Puff! Puff! Several blood-red spikes pierced into the soil. What's that sound? Eleanor suddenly heard a sharp piercing sound behind her. She was so shocked that she couldn't help but want to look back. Judging from the number of sounds, there should be 8 or 9. It shouldn't be Aisha who was chasing after her. Moreover, her magic marks didn't have the ability to drill into the ground. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The piercing sound was extremely fast as it approached Eleanor. Although she was good at drilling into the ground, after all, her huge body drilled into the soil. Not good. Eleanor abruptly turned around with her back facing the ground. The monstrous limbs beneath her abdomen and the sharp claws on her arms that were covered in black carapace were placed in front of her chest as she nervously looked at the sharp screeching sound that was rapidly approaching her. PFFF. The sound reached her in an instant, bursting through the soil in front of her. To her astonishment, it was a blood-red sharp object. Its surface was covered in blood vessels, and within it were green tendons and veins. Eleanor was shocked and hurriedly raised her hand to grab it. Several popping sounds rang out, and the other sharp sounds of friction arrived in an instant. Almost at the same time, they pierced through the soil and attacked from both sides of her body. Just as Eleanor raised her hand to block the blood-red stinger that was aimed at her face, her waist and thighs were pierced by the other stingers. Blood flowed out of her body, and intense pain made her feel as though her body was being torn apart. She could not help but groan in pain. A layer of sharp blades appeared on the inside of her abdomen, and she slashed at the stinger. With a few puffs, the strange limb on her abdomen cut off the blood-red spike. Before she could heave a sigh of relief, she saw a large amount of blood spurt out from the inside of the severed blood-red spike. At the same time, it extended and regenerated. Without waiting for Eleanor to react, the new blood-red thorns quickly wrapped around her body like a dumpling. At the same time, they rapidly contracted and pulled her body towards the surface. However, as she did not have the skill to break through the soil, the crimson spike had no choice but to forcefully drag her to the ground. The previously solidified soil squeezed Eleanor's body to the point where she was unable to move. Roar! Aisha let out a low roar, and her dragon wings suddenly trembled. The crimson spikes that had suddenly grown out from the edge of her wings quickly retracted. At the same time, the soil in front of her feet loosened, and along with her low roar, the ground suddenly cracked open. Bang! A huge, strange shadow that looked like a spider and a lobster was pulled out of the soil. It was the demonized Eleanor. The crimson spike was like an arm that swung Eleanor up high and smashed her to the ground. Aisha exerted force on the soles of her feet and suddenly rushed over, throwing Eleanor, who was unable to fight, back to the ground. She opened her mouth and ruthlessly bit down on one of the strange limbs on Eleanor's chest. Her sharp teeth immediately broke the surface of the strange limb's black carapace, and blood and minced meat oozed out from within. She tore at Eleanor in a frenzy, and the blood-colored spikes on her dragon wings were like 7 or 8 venomous snakes, wrapping themselves around Eleanor's body tighter and tighter. One of the spikes was wrapped around her neck, causing Eleanor to feel suffocated. Dean, who was on the high slope in the distance, was relieved when he saw Aisha pull the attacker out of the soil. Then he quickly chased after her. When he saw that Aisha had completely suppressed the opponent, he quickly raised his hand and shook the bell, issuing an order to not attack. Aisha's body slightly stiffened when she heard the bell, but her claws and dragon wings trembled violently. It was as if she was trying to break away from some invisible comfort, or as if she was trying to restrain her killing instinct. Dean was shocked and a little nervous when he saw her change. He had asked Aisha to withdraw her demonized state. In addition to the fact that this state was too frightening, after entering this state, her desire to kill and her strong thirst for blood would increase, which would make it more difficult to control. So, he would only let her release her full strength as a last resort. Aisha's throat bones rubbed against each other as if a blade was stirring in her throat. She looked up at Dean, and his figure was reflected in her dark pupils. She looked at him ferociously. 1 second passed, 2 seconds passed, 3 seconds passed, and the trembling of her body gradually subsided until it was completely motionless, as if it was frozen in time. Dean breathed a sigh of relief and immediately stimulated the state of semi-limitless. White bones gushed out of his body to protect the vital parts of his body. He jumped in front of Aisha and looked at the attacker who was strangled by her demonized body. He found that it was a woman, and judging from her skills, she should be a pioneer. He didn't expect that the inner wall would send another pioneer. Judging from the behavior of this pioneer, it seemed that she didn't want to attack him, but to scout for information. After all, if it was an attack, she wouldn't have lured the poisonous insects to beat the grass and scare the snake. Additionally, if it were Zhang Tai, after losing one pioneer, he would not dispatch another one. He would dispatch at least 2 or 3 pioneers to ensure that he could kill the target with 0 loss. He squatted in front of the female pioneer and suddenly punched her temple. Although she was protected by the black carapace, he could see through the X-ray vision that it was still the weakest part of her skull. As his hidden force entered her body, the female pioneer's frightened eyes suddenly became dull and she passed out. Dean looked at her purplish face and immediately shook the bell. The dragon wings on Aisha's back contracted slightly when she heard the sound. The blood-red long thorns on it were all retracted back into the dragon wings. Finally, the scales covering her body faded away. The outermost scales lost their luster and became dry and hard. They fell down like bark and fell all over the ground. Dean looked at her. At the moment, her clothes were damaged because of the battle. Her legs and arms were white like jade. She looked very attractive. He glanced at the attendants who were rushing over and immediately took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, covering her smooth, snow-white back. He then took off his long robe and tied it around her waist, covering her slender, snow-white legs. After that, he waved to Noise, who was in the distance. Noise quickly came and looked at the huge pits on the battlefield. He was secretly shocked. "Master, are you okay?" Dean immediately said, "Take this woman and immediately prepare the largest amount of anesthetic to inject into her." Noise looked at the unconscious attacker on the ground. Seeing the hideous body of the attacker, he was a little scared. He had seen some hunters with strange beast-like limbs due to magic marks, but he had never seen such a large area of beast-like limbs. Except for the face and the torso, there was almost no trace of a human being. Was this really a human being? Such thoughts flashed in his mind. He resisted the fear and nausea as he picked her up. Chapter 673. I know. Barton panicked and subconsciously agreed. He wanted to ask if Dean was injured, but he found that Dean had left with Aisha. He turned his gaze to the battlefield and saw Noise running over with a strange humanoid monster in his arms. The strange body of the humanoid monster made him instinctively feel fear and disgust. "I'll go first," Noise said in a hurry as he passed by Barton. Barton nodded and looked at Noise back until he disappeared. He slowly withdrew his gaze and came to the previous battlefield. He suddenly saw a shocking pit. He was secretly shocked. If he didn't see it with his own eyes, he wouldn't dare to imagine that it was caused by a human. Was the person that Noise was holding still a human? He paused for a moment as he thought of Dean's order. He immediately called the commander who was in charge of guarding the square and passed the order. Dean had entered the temple with Aisha in his arms. He looked at Noise and asked him to throw the assassin to the ground. Then he went to get the anesthetic. Dean went to the weapons rack in the temple after Noise left. He took out some swords and knives from it. Then he rummaged through the emergency medicine rack to find some drugs. As the saying goes, all medicines are poisonous. This concept was common in any country and any era. In this era, many of the drugs were made from the decomposition of poisons. For example, anesthetics. An ordinary person would die if there was too much of it. There were some drugs that could relieve pain and stop bleeding. Dean took out a few of them and found some utensils to grind them in a powder and smeared them on the daggers and swords. He came to the front of the unconscious female assassin and looked for the weak structure under her carapace through his X-ray vision. Soon he found several targets. He clenched the dagger and stabbed it into a hair-thin crevice on the inside of the carapace near her throat. Puff! Blood oozed out from the inside. At the same time, the unconscious Eleanor was awakened by the pain. The first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was the young man who was just inches away from her, riding on top of her. Dean didn't panic when he saw her wake up. He didn't know how long it would take for her to wake up. That's why he didn't wait for Noise to get the anesthetics. "Don't move," Dean spoke quickly. "As long as my hand trembles, I will cut your neck. Her Highness Aisha will kill you." The other party was a pioneer, so he guessed that she must know Aisha, so he mentioned her. Maybe it could suppress her. Eleanor's face changed as she heard Dean's words. She quickly glanced around and saw Aisha sitting on the chair next to her. It was Aisha. Her heart tightened, and she suppressed her killing intent. She stared at Dean coldly and said, "You want to hold me hostage? With just you? Although I don't know what happened to Her Highness Aisha, but if my guess is correct, then she should be dead. Right now, she's just a zombie. I just don't know why she won't attack you." "Shut up," Dean roared and slapped her in the face. Eleanor was dumbfounded. Although her face was covered by the black carapace, and she didn't feel much pain, she didn't expect that her words would anger this young man. Furthermore, she found it hard to believe that he was so daring. When had she ever been slapped in the face? She's not dead. She won't die. Dean's face was ferocious and even a little twisted. His eyes flashed with a frightening cold light. He looked straight into her eyes, as if to make her yield and agree with his words. She's not a zombie. Don't let me hear you insult her again, or I'll make you beg for death. Eleanor's body trembled slightly. She didn't listen to Dean's words at all. Her fingers clenched and loosened, then clenched again. The anger in her heart tumbled several times, but she finally endured it. It wasn't because of the young man's threat, but because if Aisha attacked her, she would be killed by Aisha in her current state. An outsider's life can't be compared with my life. She silently comforted herself and digested the anger in her heart. Dean's angry brain gradually sobered up as he looked at her. There was a trace of tension in his heart as he thought about the previous loss of control. But there was more anger and killing intent in his heart. He secretly decided that no matter how much she cooperated, he would torture her to death. At this time, noise came from outside the temple. He was shocked as he saw Dean riding on Eleanor's body. He didn't expect that the terrifying woman would wake up, but it seemed that Dean was controlling her. He carefully stepped forward and said, "Master, I have brought the thing." He didn't directly say the anesthetic, as he was worried that it would stimulate the monster. Dudian looked at Eleanor and said to Noyce, "Inject her." Eleanor was surprised. "What are you going to do? What do you want to inject?" Dean replied in a cold voice, "Just a little painkiller to calm your emotions." Eleanor didn't believe his words. There was anger and hesitation in her heart. If she resisted, then, not to mention Aisha, who was next to her, the teenager could kill her. She knew that Dudian was right from the beginning. As long as the dagger in his hand trembled a little, he could cut the blood vessels in her throat. Once this part was cut, with her self-healing ability, she would bleed to death before she could heal. Moreover, Aisha was eyeing her covetously. She may not get timely treatment and would die. She gritted her teeth and decided to endure. She didn't know that her hesitation at this moment would make her regret endlessly. Noyce saw that she didn't resist, so he injected the anesthetic into her body. Following the injection of the anesthetic, Eleanor immediately felt the area that had been injected lose its sensation, as though it had stiffened. She knew that it wasn't the painkiller that Dean was talking about. It was some kind of poison that would make her lose her combat effectiveness. However, she had expected this. She had considered the possibility of becoming a prisoner when she chose to endure. Becoming a prisoner wasn't the worst outcome for her. First of all, she was certain that the other party wouldn't kill her easily. Otherwise, he could just kill her directly. Therefore, she had many opportunities to escape while she was a prisoner. As long as the other party was slightly careless or revealed a flaw, she would be able to escape. Moreover, even if she couldn't escape and was imprisoned, she believed that if Haley knew that she didn't go back, she would get the answer she wanted. Then she would come to the outer wall to fight with Haley and rescue her. No matter what it was better than being killed on the spot if she resisted. Dean was relieved as he saw her admit defeat. Although he could kill her directly if she resisted, but it wasn't worth it. Life was more valuable than death. Of course, there were people who couldn't even compare to the leg hair of the dead. Dean estimated that the anesthetic should be effective, so he called Noyce to tie Eleanor's limbs. Eleanor looked at Dean coldly. "You're wrong if you want to get anything out of me. I've always been lenient to prisoners. You should sleep first." Dean took another tube of anesthetic and injected it into the dagger on her throat. The anesthetic effect quickly flowed into her brain through the blood vessels. Eleanor felt that her brain was stiff and her vision gradually blurred. She closed her eyes and pretended to be in a coma. She resisted silently, but gradually fell asleep unknowingly. Dean asked Noyce to get more anesthetics. The amount of anesthetics alone may not be enough to knock down a pioneer. A large number of anesthetics were sent into the temple. Dean injected them into various parts of her body. When he felt it was enough, He fetched the chains and tied all of her demonized limbs in the least powerful posture. Being tied in such a posture, even though she had the power of a pioneer, she could not give full play to her power. Noyce looked at Dean and asked, "Master, do you want to imprison her now?" "Imprison?" Dean shook his head. "Go and get my weapon." Noyce was startled, but immediately knew which weapon Dean was talking about. After a moment, he returned to the temple. He was holding the weapon that Dean forged in the 9th region. Dean held the splitter's blade. Although it was in a folded state, it was extremely wide and long. He aimed at the weak part of the demonized body on the woman's abdomen and slashed out. With a puff, a demonized body was chopped off and fell to the ground, fresh blood gushing out. Dean looked at the other party and found that she was still unconscious. He knew that the anesthetic was completely effective. He immediately aimed at the second demonized body. After a moment, all of Eleanor's demonized body was cut off, including her arms. Both of her legs were cut off below the knees. Only her upper body was covered with black armor. Dean sprinkled hemostatic powder on every part of her body to stop the bleeding. He didn't want her to die from excessive blood loss. He used the X-ray ability to observe her heartbeat. He could see her life status at any time. Noyce looked at the bloody limbs scattered on the floor of the hall. It was like a purgatory on earth. He felt like vomiting an inexplicable discomfort. This was the temple, the most sacred place. But now it was like a living hell. Dean wiped the sweat on his forehead after cutting off all the parts of the woman that could attack. He threw the knife to the side and washed his hands in the basin next to him. He asked Noyce to get some drugs to weaken the nerves. These drugs were commonly used in the Dark Church. Now the entire Dark Church was in his pocket. Naturally, there were a lot of rare high-level drugs that were refined by 5-star alchemists and great potion masters. The effect was extremely strong. Some of them were violent poisons that could kill a pioneer if taken directly. Chapter 674. After Noyce brought the various drugs, Dean checked them and carefully adjusted the dosage. If the dosage was too small, it would be difficult to have an effect. If the dosage was too large, he was afraid that he would directly inject the extremely weak female pioneer to death. To be on the safe side, he first concocted a medium dosage and injected it into her. Then, he observed the changes in her body's vital signs. Soon, he saw that her heartbeat suddenly sped up, thumping madly, then quickly weakened, followed by rapid heartbeat. This was an abnormal reaction after the drug took effect. It would greatly consume the user's lifespan, but at the same time, it would bring an unparalleled pleasure. Dean picked up the cold water and poured it on the female scavenger's face. Water splashed everywhere, jolting Eleanor out of her stupor. She hurriedly looked up, and her pupils constricted in shock. Apart from the young man in front of her, the ground beneath his feet was completely dyed red. Limbs covered in black carapace were scattered all over the place. They looked extremely familiar. She looked down and was stunned. Her arms were gone, and the lower part of her body below the knees was also gone. Only her naked torso was left. No, she was horrified. It was difficult for her to accept this fact. She never thought that the handsome teenager in front of her would be so cruel and merciless. She thought that at most he would use drugs or equipment to lock her up and imprison her. She didn't expect him to do it so thoroughly and directly abolish her body. Her heart was full of regret. If she had known this earlier, she would have risked her life to kill the teenager. At least she could have perished together with him. Dean looked at her quietly, watching her face change from shock to remorse and undisguised murderous intent. He said in an indifferent tone of admiration, "You have changed your mentality quite fast. You deserve to be a pioneer. If you were an ordinary person, you would have fainted or burst into tears and collapsed completely." Eleanor clenched her teeth and stared at Dean angrily. She wanted to eat him with her eyes. "You will not have a good death." "What a simple curse," Dean said indifferently. Dean indifferently said, "Your mistake is that you despise me too much. If you had a bit of backbone, then at least you could have died, but now it's too late." Eleanor was angry, but she was an experienced pioneer after all. She didn't let her anger get to her head. She said, "You want to get information from me? Don't even think about it. I won't tell you. Even if I tell you, aren't you afraid that I'll tell you false information? I advise you to let me go. I have no ill intentions towards you. If you go too far, I will definitely bring you destruction." Is this a threat or a plea? Dean stared at her. "Even if I let you go, you won't live. Don't you know that you have been infected with a highly toxic poison?" Eleanor was stunned for a moment before she sneered. "Don't try to scare me," Dean said in a cold voice. "Did you forget that Her Highness Aisha bit your body?" Eleanor was shocked, and her face suddenly changed. She suddenly remembered that the demonized body in her abdomen had been bitten by Aisha. She didn't think about it, because she was captured and trapped. Now that Dean mentioned it, her whole body suddenly broke into cold sweat. Aisha's form was clearly in the state of zombification. Although the teenager didn't admit it, but she wouldn't question her judgment. In other words, she was very likely to be infected with ptomaine. Moreover, it was a super strong ptomaine that could infect Aisha. It's over. Her heart was cold, and her eyes were full of despair. Dean's heart sank when he saw the despair in her eyes. He said it mainly to see her reaction. From her current reaction, it was obvious that in her cognition, being infected with ptomaine meant the worst situation. Moreover, there was no hope. Even when she saw her limbs cut off, she didn't despair like this. Could it be that after being infected by ptomaine, there was no way to reverse the situation? Humans have been fighting with the undeads outside the giant wall for hundreds of years. Couldn't they develop a drug to remove ptomaine infection? He clenched his fists, and his heart was full of anger. He didn't believe it. He suddenly thought that maybe this woman's status was not high enough. So even if she knew the existence of the drug, she couldn't get it. So she was desperate. It was also possible that her status was too low, so she didn't know the top secrets. Yes, it must be so, Dean thought in his heart. His heart that was cold and about to go crazy suddenly grasped a life-saving straw. He took a deep breath, stared at the female pioneer coldly, and said, "Do you think you still have hope to live?" Eleanor looked at the air in front of her in despair. Her mind was completely blank, and she couldn't hear what Dean said. Only endless fear echoed in her mind. She never thought that her life would suddenly come to an end. What kind of feeling was this? She thought that she still had a lot of things to do and a lot of good days that she hadn't enjoyed. Suddenly, a little light appeared in her despairing eyes. Seeing the sudden burst of light, Dean's heart beat fiercely, but the next moment he was hit by Eleanor's question. "How long have I been in a coma? How long has it been since I was caught by you?" She looked at Dean impatiently, and her eyes were full of expectation. Looking at such a pair of eyes full of hope, Dean's mood became cold. There was a trace of death in his eyes, and he said expressionlessly, "It has been about half an hour since the infection. With your physique, you should be able to hold on for an hour. You still have half an hour left to think. Think with human thinking. Do you have any last words?" Hearing Dean's words, Eleanor's heart suddenly became cold, as if it was stuck by ice. Her whole body was cold. She was stunned for a moment, and then smiled bitterly. "If I knew this, I would have killed you. I would have dared to fight with you. As long as you can tell me your identity and the information behind you, I can let you go immediately." Dean still held a glimmer of hope and quietly looked at her. Eleanor smiled and looked at him mockingly. "Don't even think about getting any information. I'm hopeless. I will wait for you in hell. I will always look up at you, and when you fall, I will pull you into the endless abyss." Her voice was full of resentment, but there was a desperate smile on her face. Noyce, who was watching from the side, shuddered. Dean's heart sank. This answer made him angry. He suddenly grabbed her throat and said, "You are too low, really too low. You are just a soldier sent to investigate the situation. What pioneer? Garbage. You are a pile of garbage. Why didn't they send a smarter person over? Why didn't they send a stronger person?" Eleanor grinned, and suddenly her teeth became extremely sharp. She bit the back of Dean's hand with her protruding fangs and tore off a piece of skin. She chewed 2 mouthfuls, spat it to the side, and laughed out loud. Now you're also finished. Ha ha, smelly brat. Who asked you to be so proud and arrogant? Now you're also infected. Noyce looked at the bloody back of Dean's hand. Master, are you okay? Dean looked at her hysterical laughter. The anger on his face slowly calmed down. After she finished laughing, he slowly said, Do you really think so? Eleanor looked at Dean's calm expression. The smile on her face disappeared, but then she thought that it might be Dean's forced calmness. However, she soon noticed that Dean's heartbeat was still flat. There were no fluctuations. In other words, there wasn't even a trace of tension in his heart. This was absolutely impossible. No matter how shrewd a person was, he wouldn't be so calm when he knew that he was going to die. Thinking of this, she suddenly thought of a possibility, and her eyes once again burst forth with new hope. Could it be that she wasn't infected? Dean coldly said as he saw the change in her expression. I forgot to tell you that I have the antidote for undead infection. What? Eleanor exclaimed in shock, her face filled with disbelief. But soon, she thought of Aisha, who had turned into an undead but wouldn't attack the boy. This situation was really strange. She was sure that Aisha had turned into an undead. The faint rotten smell she smelled before was clearly locked on when she saw Aisha. This smell came from her body. This was the smell of an undead that she was very familiar with. However, Aisha was very different from the undead in her impression. Although Aisha's fighting style was similar to that of an undead, but she would not attack other people. Such a phenomenon was simply impossible, but it really existed. Thinking of this, she looked at the faint mockery in Dean's eyes, and her heart suddenly believed a little. Although the probability was very low, maybe this boy really had such a magical medicine in his hands. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.